Silver Sword by Ian Serraillier. Read by Michael Maloney. This is the story of a Polish family and what happened to them during the Second World War. Their home was in Warsaw, where the father, Józef Balicki, was headmaster of a primary school. He and his Swiss wife, Margaret, had 3 children. In early 1940, when the Nazis took Józef away to prison, Ruth was nearly 13, Edek was 11, and the fair-haired Bronya, 3. Warsaw under the Nazis was a place of terror, and the Balickis had a grim time. But first, I must tell you of Józef Balicki and what happened to him in the prison camp of Zakina. The prison was in the mountains of South Poland. A few wooden huts clung to the edge of the bleak hillside. Day and night the wind beat down upon them, for the pine trees were thin and gave little shelter. For 5 months of the year, snow smothered the huts. It gave a coating of white fur to the 12-foot double fence of wire that surrounded the clearing. In stormy weather, it blew into the bare huts through cracks in the walls. There was no comfort in Zakina. The camp was crowded with prisoners. Most were Poles, but there were some Czechs, Hungarians, and a few Russians. Each hut held 120, yet it was hardly big enough for 40. At mealtimes they huddled round trestle tables to eat their cabbage and potato soup. For drinking, they had warm water with breadcrumbs in it. The guards called it coffee. Twice a week they had a dab of butter, and a teaspoonful of jam on Saturdays. What use was this for keeping out the cold? Few had the strength to escape. Those that were not caught and sent back died of exposure in the mountains. But Józef was determined to escape. During the first winter he was too ill to try. He would sit thinking of his family and staring at the few tattered photos of them he had been allowed to keep. He would think of his school in Warsaw and wonder what was happening there now. When the Nazis came, they had taken away the Polish textbooks and made him teach in German. They had hung pictures of Hitler in all the classrooms. Once, during a scripture lesson, Józef had turned the picture of Hitler to the wall. Someone had reported this to the Nazis. Then the storm troops had come for Józef and bundled him off to Zakina. During the summer, his health mended. A group of 6 of them tried to break away, but the attempt failed. For this, he had a month of solitary confinement. The following winter he was ill again, but no less determined to escape. He decided to wait till early spring when the snow was beginning to melt and the nights were not so bitter. Very carefully he laid his plans. It was no use thinking of cutting the wire. There was a trip line inside the fence, and anyone who crossed it would be shot. There was only one way out, the way the guards went, through the gate. His idea was to disguise himself as one of them and follow them as they went off duty. But how was he to get hold of the uniform? At the back of each block was an unheated hut known as the cooler. It had 4 cells to which unruly prisoners were sent to cool off. It was a popular place in summer as it was so quiet, but in winter you could freeze to death there. In spring, with luck, you might survive a night or 2 of frost. One March day, during the morning hut inspection, Józef flicked a paper pellet at the guard. Within 5 minutes he was in a cell in the cooler. For 2 days he stamped up and down to keep himself warm. He dared not lie down in case he dropped off to sleep and never woke again. Twice a day a guard brought him food. For the rest of the time he was alone. On the evening of the 3rd day the guard came as usual. When Józef heard his footsteps in the snow he crouched down at the back of his cell. He had a stone, and a catapult he'd made from pine twigs and the elastic sides of his boots. His eyes were fixed on the flap in the door. In a moment the guard would unlock it, peer inside, and hand in the food. Tensely, Józef waited. He heard the key grate in the lock of the outside door. The hinges creaked open. There was the sound of a match spluttering. The guard was lighting the lamp. Heavy boots clumped across the floor. Józef drew back the elastic. He heard the padlock being unlocked. The flap slid aside. The stone struck the guard in the middle of the forehead and knocked him down. The floor shook as he tumbled. Joseph must act quickly. He knew the guard kept his keys in his greatcoat pocket. He must get them without delay. He took a hook and line from under his bed. He had made the line by cutting strips from his blanket and plaiting them together. The hook was a bent 4-inch nail he had smuggled in from his hut. The keys were on the floor. They had been shaken out of the greatcoat pocket when the guard fell. Quickly, Joseph fished for the ring of keys and hauled it up. Moments later, he was kneeling beside the senseless body, hastily stripping off the uniform. There was no time to lose. Already the locking up of the prisoners had started, and he could hear the guards shouting at them outside. Joseph felt warm in the guard's uniform. The greatcoat reached to his ankles. The fur cap had flaps for covering his ears. He smiled to himself as he locked the guard in the freezing cell. Then, turning up his collar, he went out into the bitter night and walked through the snow towards Block E. Hundreds of times he had watched the soldiers march out of camp. He had memorized every order, every movement. It seemed to him quite natural now to be lining up with the others. "Anything to report?" the officer asked each of them in turn. "All correct, sir," they answered. "All correct, sir," said Joseph in his best German. "Good. Dismiss," said the officer. Joseph followed the other soldiers out of the great spiked gate, and into freedom. It seemed too good to be true. Some of the soldiers stopped outside the guardhouse to gossip. Joseph walked straight ahead, turning his head away from the window light as he passed. The village of Zakina was a mile below the camp, a mass of huts clinging to the steep cliffside. There was no moon, but Joseph could see lights in the windows. He walked straight through the village. Suddenly he was challenged in German. "Karl, give me the cigarettes," said a rough voice. He took no notice and walked on. "Karl, the cigarettes!" the voice shouted threateningly. There were footsteps behind him. Joseph turned to look. A drunken soldier was tottering after him. Joseph began to run. The soldier ran too, swearing whenever he stumbled. Just below the last huts in the village, the road curled away from the cliff edge. A mail car had pulled up. There was a pile of luggage in the road, and an angry group of people had gathered round. "You're 2 hours late!" someone cried. "I told you there was an avalanche. The road was blocked," returned the driver. Joseph dived behind the wall of snow the snowplow had thrown up at the side of the road. He was right on the edge of the cliff. He heard the sound of crates being dumped in the road, and the drunken soldier cry, "Driver, you've pinched my cigarettes!" "Chuck him over the cliff," said someone. A scuffle. Laughter. Steps coming towards him. Joseph slid quietly away to where a square shape jutted out from the road. In the dark, it looked like a cart without wheels. Quickly, he hid underneath. At once, a heavy crate banged down onto the boards above his head. The boards quivered and shook. Boots scraped the wood, shuffled on the snow. There was a babble of voices, jokes and leg-pulling mixed with the loading of the crates. Joseph waited tensely while a tarpaulin was draped over the crates. When the soldiers were back in the road, he heaved himself over the edge and under the tarpaulin. A loud voice shouted, "Are you ready?" From the other side of the dark valley came an answering call. Suddenly, Joseph realized the wooden boards he lay on were moving, sliding out into the darkness. As soon as he dared, he lifted the tarpaulin and looked out. He was in a roofless cage. It was hung by pulleys and wire to an overhead cable and was swinging giddily from side to side. An aerial luggage lift. These were common in the mountains for carrying goods from one side of a steep valley to the other. Joseph sighed with relief. The giddy movement of the cage made him feel sick, but every second it was taking him farther from his enemies. Ahead was the black shape of the mountain. With every swing of the cage and creak of the cable, it came nearer. Were there soldiers on that side, too? If so, what was he to do? Joseph's hand was in his revolver holster, but all he could feel was a stick of chocolate. He could not escape discovery, and he was quite unarmed. The cage banged to a standstill. A torch was flashed into Joseph's face. "I have you covered with my pistol," said Joseph steadily. "If you make a sound, I'll shoot." A Polish voice swore. "Be quiet," said Joseph. "Hand me your torch." He seized it from the trembling hands and flashed the beam onto a grey, bearded face. Joseph's spirits rose. The man was Polish, a countryman of his. Joseph spoke more gently. "Do as I tell you, and you'll come to no harm. Unload the cage, then take me to where you live." The crates were stacked, and the shed by the cage locked. The peasant had kept one crate for himself, which contained provisions and clothing. He lifted it onto his shoulder and led the way along a track of beaten snow that wound upwards through pine trees. Soon they came to his home, a large chalet with wide overhanging eaves. Wood was stacked at the sides. He led Joseph inside. A fire was burning brightly in a wide hearth. A large pot hung above it from a hook in the chimney, and an old lady was sitting by the fire. She looked startled. Joseph threw his cap and greatcoat over a chair. "Here's the pistol I almost shot you with," he said. "It's a slab of chocolate." He broke it into 3 pieces, giving one to each of them. They were suspicious, and waited till Joseph had swallowed his piece before they ate theirs. "I don't understand," said the peasant slowly. "You speak like a Pole, but your uniform—" At that moment, a bell clanged out from the other side of the valley. It echoed among the mountains. "That's the prison bell," said Joseph. "It rang like that when the last prisoner escaped." "You've come to search for him?" asked the old lady. "I am the prisoner," said Joseph. "I knocked out a guard and stole his uniform. Look, if you don't believe me, here's my camp number burnt into my arm. ZAK 2473. I want you to hide me." The number convinced them he was telling the truth. They knew if they were found hiding him, they would die, but they did not hesitate. Joseph slept in a warm bed that night for the first time for 2 years, and in the morning the old man went to work the luggage lift as usual. Before going, he arranged a danger signal. If there were any soldiers coming across in the cage, he would whistle, and he showed Joseph a hiding place in the woodshed. While he was away, Joseph showed the old woman the tattered photos of his family. He had taken them out of his wallet so many times to look at them that they were creased and crumpled and finger-marked all over. Suddenly, there was a loud bang on the door. A voice called out in German. There was no time to escape to the woodshed. Why had the old man given no warning? "Quick, up there!" The old woman pointed up the chimney. "There's an opening on the right, halfway up." Joseph dived into the hearth and hauled himself up over the iron spit. The fire was only smouldering, and there was not much smoke. He had not found the opening when the door burst open, and soldiers came in. While they searched the room, he stood very still, his legs astride the chimney. He wanted to cough. He thought his lungs would burst. Suddenly, a head peered up the chimney. It was the old woman. "They've gone upstairs," she said, "but don't come down yet." He crept inside the opening, coughing. He could see the sky through the wide chimney top above him. He was congratulating himself on his good luck when he heard the soldiers return to the room below. With difficulty, he controlled his cough. "What about the chimney?" said a German. "Plenty of room to hide up there." "Plenty of soot, too," said the other soldier. "What about you going up?" "Not likely." "Then we'll send a couple of bullets up for luck." 2 ear-splitting explosions. It seemed as if the whole chalet was falling down. Joseph clung onto his perch. There was a great tumbling about his ears. He clung and clung and clung, till his fingers were torn from their grip, and he fell. When he came to his senses, he was lying on the floor. The old woman was washing his face with cold water. "It's all right," "They've gone," she said. "The fall of soot saved you. The soldiers ran for it when the soot came down." "I'm sorry I didn't have time to warn you," said the old man. "The soldiers had hidden themselves in the cage. I didn't see them till it was too late." Joseph spent 2 weeks in the chalet. The old couple treated him like a son, sharing all they had with him. His thin cheeks filled out, and he gained several pounds in weight, and in their company his mind grew more peaceful than it had been for years. In the brutality of his prison life, he had almost forgotten what kindness was. On the 15th night, he left the chalet on the long journey home. The moon was in her first quarter, and it was freezing hard. He was wearing the warm woolen clothes of a Polish Highlander. The old man went with him as guide till they were clear of the high mountains. On the afternoon of the second day, they reached the edge of the snow line. Little rivers coursed down from under the snow. Wherever they trod, the ground was soggy and their boots squelched. But it was a joy to leave the snow behind and see the snowdrops and crocuses everywhere. Lower down in the valleys, the grass was already green, gay with primroses, violets, and wild daffodils. In the gorge where the river Sanachek tumbles down between steep wooded rocks to meet the great rivers of the plains, they said goodbye to each other. The old man took Joseph's head between his hands, blessed him, and wished him good fortune. It took Joseph 4.5 weeks to walk to Warsaw. He had lived in the city all his life and knew it well. But now there was hardly a street he recognized, and not an undamaged building anywhere. The place was as bleak and silent as the craters of the moon. Instead of homes, he found crumbling walls. Instead of streets, tracks of rubble between mountains of bricks. Windows were glassless. Buildings were burnt-out shells. In this wilderness, people still managed to go on living. Joseph saw them wandering, pale and hungry-eyed in the ruins. They had made their homes in cellars or had dug caves in the rubble. A few had even tried to make them look gay. A bomb gash in the cellar wall was draped with bright curtains. In another hole, there was a window box full of purple crocuses. Here and there a tree that had escaped blast damage sprouted with spring leaves. But the only really lively place was the railway. The Nazis had to keep this clear, whatever the cost, and the 8 lines of polished steel along which day and night the busy trains poured gleamed. Eastwards, with troops' ammunition, they carried war to Russia. Westwards, they brought back the wounded to Germany, and sometimes rich plunder from the Ukraine. Joseph spent 3 days finding the street where he used to live. The schoolhouse, his home, had disappeared. There was a house opposite with a sign marked Polish Welfare. He made some inquiries there, but the people were new and could not help him. At another house, he had better luck. He knew the woman who lived there, Mrs. Kraus, who had had a child at his school. He questioned her eagerly about his family. "The Nazis destroyed your school," she said. "What happened to my wife?" "They came for her in January last year during the night. She's in Germany, probably working on the land. I'm a member of the Polish Council for Protection, and we tried to trace her, but without success." "And the children?" asked Joseph. With a weary sigh, she told him all she knew. "On the night your wife was taken, someone fired at the van from your house. One of the Nazi soldiers was hit. An hour later, they sent a truckload of soldiers with explosives. They blew the whole place up. The children have not been seen since." It was obvious she believed them to be dead. Without a word, Joseph got up and went out into the street. For the rest of the day he wandered among the ruins, too dazed to think. He spent the night in the burnt-out shell of a bus station, in spite of the rain which fell through the roof. He spent the next few days searching the ruins for his children with a kind of hopeless despair. At night, he returned to the home of the Krauses, who fed him and gave him a bed. One night, Mrs. Kraus said to him, It's no use. You're going on like this. Your children must have died in the explosion. If you want to go on searching, search for your wife. Well, Germany's a large place, said Joseph. What hope should I have of finding her? She might escape as you did, said Mrs. Krause. You must have known something like this might happen. Did you never make any plans? Did you never fix a meeting place? Yes, we did. We arranged that if we were separated, we would try to make for Switzerland. My wife is Swiss, and her parents live there still. Mrs. Krause took his hands in hers and smiled. There's your answer, then. Go to Switzerland, and with God's help, you will find her there. But the children, they may still be here, said Joseph. He spent several more days looking for them. One afternoon, while he was poking among the rubble of his old home, he found a tiny silver sword. About 5 inches long, it had a brass hilt engraved with a dragon breathing fire. It was a paper knife that he had once given to his wife for a birthday present. While he was cleaning the blade on his jersey, he noticed that he was not alone. A small, ragged boy sat watching him keenly. He had fair, wispy hair and unnaturally bright eyes. Under one arm he had a wooden box, under the other a bony grey kitten. Joseph walked over and stroked the kitten. What's his name? He asked. He hasn't got a name. He's just mine, said the boy. What's your name? Said Joseph. The boy hugged the wooden box. His eyes were shrewdly summing Joseph up. Give me that sword, he said. But it's mine, said Joseph. You found it on my pitch. This is my place. Joseph explained about his house, and how this rubble was all that was left of it. I'll give you food for it, said the boy, and he offered Joseph a cheese sandwich. I have plenty, said Joseph. He put his hand into his pocket, but it was empty. He looked again at the boy's sandwich, and saw it was one that Mrs. Krause had given him that morning, only rather grubby now. You little pickpocket, he laughed. But before he could grab it back, the boy had swallowed most of it and given the rest to the cat. After a while, Joseph said, I'm looking for my family. Ruth is the eldest. She'd be 15 now, and tall and fair. Then Edek, he'd be 13. Bronya is the youngest, she'd be 5. He described them and asked if the boy had seen them. The boy shrugged. Warsaw's full of lost children. They're dirty and starving, and they all look alike. His words made him sound indifferent, but Joseph noticed that the boy had listened carefully and seemed to be storing up everything in the back of his mind. I'll give you this sword on one condition, said Joseph. I'm not sure my children are dead. If ever you see Ruth or Edek or Bronya, you must tell them that I'm going to Switzerland to find their mother, to their grandparents' home. Tell them to follow. The boy grabbed the sword. He popped it into the little wooden box, picked up the cat, and ran off. I'll tell you more about them tomorrow, Joseph called after him. Meet you here in the morning. Joseph did not expect the boy to keep his appointment with him in the morning, but he was there, sitting on the rubble with his cat and his wooden box. It's no use your trying to pick my pockets this morning, said Joseph, sitting down beside him. You've pinned the flaps, said the boy, but that doesn't make any difference. Joseph moved away a couple of paces. Keep your hands off, he said. Now listen, I'm starting off for Switzerland tonight. I'm going to jump a train. Where's the best place? You'll be caught and shot, said the boy. You'll freeze to death in the trucks. The nights are bitter. Your hair will be white with frost. Your fingers will turn to icicles. That is what happens to those who jump trains. You seem to know a lot about it, said Joseph. I have seen it, said the boy. Can't be helped. I must risk it, said Joseph. I'll take you to the bend where the train slowed down, said the boy. He jumped up and began running. Joseph had a job to keep up with him. But the boy could run and talk and point out the landmarks and stuff food into his mouth and the cats all at the same time. Joseph tried to find out something about this extraordinary boy. What was his name? Where did he live? Were his parents still alive? But the boy would tell him nothing. They came to the railway and followed the track past the station to a large bend. Here, beside a train shed, they sat down to watch. "All the trains slow down here," said the boy. "You will find no better place to jump if the Nazi patrols see us. They'll shoot." "What's all that you're carrying?" said Joseph. He looked closer and saw that the boy's ragged shirt was stuffed with long loaves, like monster cigars. "Mother in heaven, where did you get that lot from?" "I borrowed them," said the boy. "At the Nazi barracks. There's plenty in the bakehouse there. Take them. You'll be hungry." "Ought to see me through to America, that lot," said Joseph as he took them. "What about yourself? You've some appetite, if I remember rightly." "I borrow for everybody," said the boy. "They always send me. I'm so small I can wriggle under the barbed wire. I run so fast the soldiers can never catch me." He broke off suddenly. "Lie down. Patrol coming." But the boy knew the ruins better than the patrol, and they got away. They came to the bend where Joseph intended to jump and hid beside an empty warehouse. It was drizzling as they sat there waiting. Joseph said, "I have much to thank you for, and I don't even know your name." The boy said nothing, but went on stroking the cat. The drizzle turned to heavy rain. "Have you no parents?" said Joseph. "I have my grey cat and this box," he said. "You won't come with me?" said Joseph. The boy ignored the question. He was undoing the wooden box and took out the little silver sword. "This is the best of my treasures," he said. "It will bring me luck, and it will bring you luck because you gave it to me. I don't tell anybody my name, it is not safe. But because you gave me the sword and I didn't borrow it, I will tell you." He whispered, "It is Jan." "There are many Jans in Poland. What's your surname?" "That's all. Just Jan." A train came along. A goods train. By the light of a signal lamp, streaming with rain, the first few trucks rumbled slowly past. "Goodbye, Jan. Remember your promise. Whatever happens, I shall not forget you. God bless you." Joseph ran alongside the train. Darkness swallowed him. Jan did not see him jump. One by one, the heavy, dismal, sodden trucks clanked by. Last of all, the small red light on the guard's van, so dim it hardly showed. Then, the shrill note of a whistle as the train gathered speed beyond the bend. It was raining heavily now. Jan was soaked to the skin. He hurried away through the dark streets. He had tucked the cat inside his jacket. It was almost as wet as he was, and hardly warm at all. Under his arm, he hugged the wooden box, and he thought of the silver sword inside. What had happened to Joseph's family that night over a year ago, when the Nazi stormtroopers called at the schoolhouse? Was what Mrs. Krause said true? Had they blown up the house with the children in it? This is what happened. That night, there was an inch of snow on the roofs of Warsaw. Ruth and Bronya were asleep in the bedroom next to their mother's. Edek's room was on the top floor. He was asleep when the Nazi soldiers broke into the house, but he woke up when he heard a noise outside his door. He jumped out of bed. The door was locked. He shouted and banged on it, but it was no use. In his mother's room, the men were rapping out orders. In the ceiling was a small trapdoor that led into the attic. A ladder lay between his bed and the wall. He hooked it under the trap and climbed up. Hidden between the water tank and the felt jacket round it was his rifle. He was a member of the Boys' Rifle Brigade and had used it in the siege of Warsaw. He took it out and quickly climbed down to his room. The noise in the room below had stopped. Looking out of the window, he saw a Nazi van outside the front door. 2 stormtroopers were taking his mother down the steps, and she was struggling. Edek lifted the window sash open. His mother was in the van, and the doors were being closed. His first shot hit a soldier in the arm. Yelling, he jumped in beside the driver. With the next 2 shots, Edek aimed at the tires. One punctured the rear wheel, but the van got away, skidding and roaring up the street. With the butt of his rifle, he broke down the door and ran down to his sisters. They were locked in too. He burst open the door. Bronya was sitting up in bed, and Ruth was trying to calm her. She was almost as distraught herself. Only the effort to comfort Bronya kept her from losing control. "I hit one of the swine," said Edek. "That was very silly of you," said Ruth. "They'll come back for us now." "I couldn't let them take Mother away like that," said Edek. "I'll be quiet, Bronya. Howling won't help." "We must get away from here before they come back," said Ruth. With some difficulty she dressed Bronya, while Edek went into the hall to fetch overcoats and boots and fur caps. "We can't get out the front way," said Edek. "There's another van coming. I heard the whistle." "What about the back?" said Ruth. "The wall's too high. We'd never get Bronya over. There's only one way. Over the roof. I'll carry Bronya. Be quick, I can hear them coming." He picked up the sobbing Bronya and led the way upstairs, his rifle slung on his back. When they were all up in the attic, he smashed the skylight. "Now listen, Bronya," said Edek. "If you make a sound, we shall never see Mother again. We shall all be killed." "Of course we shall see her again," Ruth added, "but only if you do as Edek says." He climbed onto the slippery roof. Ruth handed Bronya up to him, then followed herself. The bitterly cold air made her gasp. "I can't carry you yet, Bronya," said Edek. "You must walk behind me and hold on to the rifle. It doesn't matter if you slip, if you hold on to the rifle, and don't look down." The first few steps, as far as the V between the chimney and the roof ridge, were ghastly. Edek made a dash for it, grabbed the telephone bracket, and hauled himself up, with Bronya clinging on behind. She was speechless with terror. He reached back and hauled Ruth up after him. After a few moments' rest, they slid down a few feet onto a flat part that jutted out, a sort of parapet. The roof ridge lay between them and the street, so they could not see what was happening down there. But they could hear shouting, the whine of cars, the screech of brakes. Luckily for them, all the houses on this side of the school were joined in one long terrace, otherwise they could not have got away. Even so, it was a miracle that none of their slips and tumbles ended in disaster. They must have gone fully 100 yards when the first explosion shook the air. A sheet of fire leapt up from their home into the frosty night sky. They fell flat in the snow and lay there. The roof shook. Another explosion. Smoke and flames poured from the windows. Sparks showered into the darkness. "Come along," said Edek. "We shan't let them have us now." They hurried along the rooftops. At last, by descending a fire escape, they reached street level. On and on they hurried, not knowing or caring where they went so long as they left those roaring flames behind them. They did not stop till the fire was far away and the pale winter dawn was breaking. They took shelter in the cellar of a bombed house. Exhausted, huddled together for warmth, they slept till long after midday, when cold and hunger woke them. They made their new home in a cellar at the other end of the city. They had tunnelled their way into it. From the street it looked like a rabbit's burrow in a mound of rubble, with part of a wall rising behind. On the far side there was a hole in the lower part of the wall, and this let in light and air as well as rain. When they asked the Polish Council of Protection about their mother, they were told she'd been taken off to Germany to work on the land. Nobody could say which part of Germany. Though they went many times to ask, they never found out any more. They made their new home as comfortable as they could. Edek, who could climb like a monkey, scaled 3 stories of a bombed building to fetch a mattress and some curtains. The curtains made good sheets. On wet days, they could be used over the hole in the wall to keep the rain out. With floorboards, he made 2 beds, chairs, and a table. With bricks from the rubble, he built a wall to divide the cellar into 2 rooms, one to live in and one to sleep in. He stole blankets from a Nazi supply dump. Here they lived for the rest of that winter and the following spring. Food was not easy to find. Ruth and Bronya had green Polish ration cards and were allowed to draw the small rations the Nazis allowed, but except when Edek found casual work, they had no money to buy food. Edek had no ration card. He had not dared to apply for one, as that would have meant disclosing his age. Everyone over 12 had to register, and he would have been carried off to Germany as a slave worker. Whenever possible, they ate at the soup kitchens which Polish welfare had set up. Sometimes they begged at a nearby convent. Sometimes they stole from the Nazis or scrounged from their garbage bins. They saw nothing wrong in stealing from their enemies, but they were very careful never to steal from their own people. War had made Edek sharp and self-reliant for his years. Ruth was slower to adapt herself to the new life. At first, during that long, drawn-out winter and the biting winds of early spring, it seemed as if she were too young to take on responsibility. But she learned gradually. She saw that Edek was always cheerful because he was always busy. One thing she could do was to make Bronya less miserable. She remembered that Bronya had always loved drawing, so Ruth encouraged her to go on drawing now. They had no pencils or paper, but they had the cellar walls and plenty of charred wood from which to make charcoal. Bronya drew what she saw. Soon the walls were covered with pictures of people queuing outside the soup kitchen and of children playing hide-and-seek among the ruins. Then Ruth started a school. She invited other lost children of Bronya's age, and while Edek was out at work or finding food, she told them stories in the cellar. When she ran out of stories, the others took their turn. She made them speak out clearly without mumbling. One day at the soup kitchen, she talked about her school. Next time she went, she was given slates and chalk and a pocket Bible. Ruth was a born teacher. She could hold the children spellbound. She varied the work as much as possible, giving the mornings to lessons and the afternoons to play. The day started with a Bible story. She read it herself, with the children round her, 3 to a blanket if it was cold. Next came reading and writing, followed by a break in the open air. Up they shot from their rabbit's warren into the sunlight. They ran down the street to the wooden fence, which they called the Riviera. Here they would sit in a long line, pressing their backs to the sun-drenched wood, soaking up the warmth till their bodies were glowing all over. On sunless days, they played a brisk game before returning to the cellar for another story. They liked the stories from the Old Testament best. Their favourite was always Daniel in the lion's den. They enjoyed it just as a story, but for Ruth it had a deeper meaning. She thought of it as the story of their own troubles. The lions with the cold and the hunger and the hardships of their life. But if only they were patient and trustful like Daniel, they would be delivered from them. In the early summer, they left the city and went to live in the woods outside. It was cold at night out in the open, and they slept huddled together in their blanket under an oak tree. There was not much rain that summer, though they had 1 or 2 drenchings in May. After that, Edek cut down some branches, lashed them together and made a lean-to. This was thick enough to keep out all but the heaviest rain. Life was much healthier here than in the city. The sun browned their limbs, and there were plenty of other families to play with. They could run about freely and hold their classes under the trees without having to keep a lookout for police patrols. Sometimes Ruth had as many as 25 in her school. She would have taken more, but they had no paper, very few slates, and no books at all. Because of the kindness of the peasants, food was more plentiful. Though they were forbidden to store food or to sell it to anyone but the Nazis, they gave the children whatever they could spare. They hid it, too, in cellars, in haystacks, in holes in the ground. With the help of the other children, they smuggled it to the towns and sold it to the Poles on the black market. Edek was one of their chief smugglers. In return for his services, he was given all the food he needed for the family. One of his dodges was to go off to town with pats of butter sewn into the lining of his coat, but he could only do this on cool days or at night. In time, the Germans became wary and posted patrols on all the main roads into the city. After that, he cut across country, using paths and rough tracks. He was well aware of the penalties if he was caught. A younger child might get away with a beating, but boys as strong as he was would be carried off to Germany. for the Nazis were getting short of labour at home. Another of Edek's dodges was the cartload of logs which he drove into the suburbs. Some of the logs were split, their centres scraped out and packed with butter and eggs, then glued together again. Once, he drove his cartload into a police patrol which was searching everything on the road. They emptied the logs onto the pavement. Edek didn't stay to see if the glue would stand up to that treatment. He dived into the crowd and made off. Police whistles were blowing and the chase had started, when some kind friend lifted him up and pitched him headfirst into a garbage cart. Here he lay hidden under cinders and dust and rotting vegetables. After that, Edek did all his smuggling at night. There came a morning, towards the end of August, when he failed to return. Ruth questioned other families in the forest, but no one had seen him. After some days of searching, she traced him to a village 10 miles away. Edek had called at a house there while the secret police were searching for hidden stores. They had found cheese sewn into the lining of his coat, and after setting fire to the house, they had taken him away in the van with the house owner as well. Ruth returned to the forest with a heavy heart, dreading to break the news to Bronya. Edek had been their lifeline. Food, clothes, money, they depended on him for all these. Now Ruth and Bronya must fend for themselves. It was an ordeal before which the bravest spirits might quail. Two years passed without news of Edek. Ruth and Bronya returned to Warsaw each winter and went back to the woods the following summer. In the summer of 1944, they began to realize that things were changing. Day and night the air was full of planes. From the distant city, they could hear the boom of guns and the explosion of bombs. The Russians were sweeping westwards, driving the Nazis before them. Radio Moscow had broadcast a call to the resistance in Warsaw. Poles, the hour of freedom is at hand. Poles, to arms! Do not lose a moment. The suburbs of Warsaw are already within range of Russian guns. At once the Poles, under General Bohr, rose up against the German garrison. All traffic ceased as the Polish underground rushed to the attack. Starving people streamed out of the cellars and flung themselves upon the Nazis, with weapons if they had them, with their fists if they had nothing else. But the Germans counterattacked from their strong points. Hastily, they concentrated 5 divisions and their tanks drove a wedge through the city as far as the Vistula. The Soviet troops outside withdrew 6 miles under orders from Moscow, leaving the Poles to fight their own battle. General Bohr was short of arms and ammunition and could not continue the struggle alone. He radioed for help to Britain and America, but the British and Americans were too busy fighting in the West. Prime Minister Churchill cabled to Stalin a request to help the Poles, but Stalin refused. So the Poles were left to fight to the bitter end. A few reached the woods. From them, Ruth learned of Nazis having to fight for every inch of ground, and of a message sent to the Pope by the women of Warsaw. Most Holy Father, for 3 weeks we have lacked food and medicine. Warsaw is in ruins. No one is helping us. The world is ignorant of our fight. On 2nd of October, the 63rd day of fighting, when the defenders had no more ammunition left, Warsaw broadcast its last appeal to the people of the world. Without help, this struggle has become hopeless. God is righteous, and in his omnipotence, he will punish all those responsible for this terrible injury to the Polish nation. Too late to save the gallant defenders, Stalin ordered the Russians to march. By January 1945, Warsaw was in Russian hands. Because of the fighting, Ruth and Bronya had put off their return to the city. They had left it till winter had set in and cold and hunger drove them and the other families from the woods. A shock awaited them. The Warsaw they had known had vanished. The old town had been wiped out. There were no streets left. Food was shorter than it had ever been. Somehow they found their way to the cellar that had been their home. The chairs and beds had gone, and the table was broken. There was a dark hole at one end, which Ruth found to be the beginning of a tunnel. It led under the street, joining up with other cellars. Because of the firing and bombing, nobody had used the streets unless they had to. With the help of this network of tunnels, the brave defenders had kept the struggle going all autumn. Patiently, and without despair, Ruth set to work to repair the damage. They still had the blankets they had brought with them from the woods. Friends provided sacks to sleep on. Some boys in Ruth's class mended the table and made chairs from boxes. When all was as straight as she could make it, Ruth started her school again, and 16 children were squeezed into the cellar. One day, something happened which was to change the course of her life and give hope to her flagging spirit. It was a sunny day, and for once there was no firing. The children were out of doors playing a game called Air Raid Alert. One of them would cry, "Alert!" and count up to 50 while the others ran for shelter before he shouted, "Stop!" Anyone who had not found a hiding place by then had to lie down and pretend to be dead. Suddenly Bronya, who was very proud because she'd never been dead yet, came running down to Ruth in the cellar. "There's a boy lying down outside and he won't get up," she cried. "Tickle his ribs," said Ruth. "I don't think he can get up," said Bronya. Ruth went out to investigate. Lying on a heap of rubble, she saw a ragged boy who might have been any age between 9 and 13. His cheeks were thin and pale, and his eyes were closed. A mangy cock, with no more bone than feather, stood by his head and squawked at anyone who went near him. Ruth chased the cock away and knelt beside the boy. "Does anyone know who he is?" she asked the children round her. Nobody did. "He looks ill and starved," said Ruth. "Yankel, will you help me lift him down to the cellar? And Eva, please find something for him to eat." They carried him down and laid him gently on the sacks. After a while he opened his eyes. "Where's Jimpy?" he said. "We'll find Jimpy later," said Ruth. "I think you must have fainted. You'll be all right in a minute." "I want Jimpy," said the boy. "Perhaps Jimpy's the name of the cock," said Bronya. "Yankel, go and fetch the cock," said Ruth. "No fear, he's bit me twice," said Yankel. Ruth was going to fetch it herself, when the cock appeared in the hole in the wall, squawked, flapped its dusty wings, and jumped down beside the boy. "Jimpy, Jimpy," said the boy, and he reached out his arms towards the mangy creature. "He's a fine cock, and he's got a fine name," said Ruth. "What's your name?" "Shan't tell you," snapped the boy. "Look, Eva's brought soup for you," said Ruth. "Sit up and drink it." A girl pushed through the crowd and went over to Ruth. "I found this in the street," she said. "I think it must be his." It was a small wooden box. Bronya seized it. "It's heavy and it rattles. He must be rich," she cried. "Ruth, may we undo the string?" "Give the box to him," said Ruth. "Nobody shall touch it without asking him." The boy took the wooden box and smiled. Everyone wanted to look inside, but he wouldn't undo it. However, he told them his name. It was Jan. For some days, Jan was too ill to leave. He needed rest, warmth, and food. The children scrounged what food they could. It was easier now the rations had come, and left the nursing to Ruth. Jan lay on the floor, Jimpy the cock stood over him as bodyguard, and Ruth was the only person it would allow near him. By the time Jan was better, he didn't want to go. So he made his home with Ruth and Bronya and became one of the family. Bronya was curious to know what was in the wooden box, but Jan never opened it. There was no chance for anyone else to open it either, for he carried it wherever he went. Several streets away there had appeared a brand new hut, a Russian control post. One afternoon Ruth called there. "Don't stand staring at me, little girl," said the burly sentry who was on duty. "I'm not a little girl. I'll be 18 next week," said Ruth, "and I want to see your officer."
The whole of Warsaw wants to see my officer. Run away and play.
It's very important.
Run away.
Ruth was angry. It's all right for you. You've got plenty to eat and warm clothes too, and a bed to sleep on. Didn't you come to set us free? You must let me see your officer. The sentry grinned.
Well, seeing it's your birthday next week, but I don't hold out much hope he'll see you.
He disappeared inside the post. A moment later he came out.
The lieutenant says, come back the year after next.
Before he realized what had happened, Ruth had pushed past him and into the post. A worried-looking lieutenant was typing at a desk.
Hey, you young hussy, come out!
Cried the sentry.
Leave her to me, Ivan, said the lieutenant.
And Ivan went out, swearing under his breath.
You're a determined young lady, said the lieutenant. What is it you want?
Food and clothes and blankets, pencils and paper. I've got 16 children. The lieutenant gasped and nearly fell into the waste-paper basket. 17 if you count the one that's lost. He really is mine. He's my brother, Edek. So is my sister, Bronya. The others are my school. They're all half-starving and they're keen to learn and they've got nothing to write on. And I want you to help me find Edek. He's been lost over a year.
Anything else? Said the lieutenant.
He waved a thick pad of papers.
See this file? It's full of missing people. All Warsaw is missing. Hopeless.
One more name won't make a lot of difference, said Ruth.
I might as well burn the lot for all the good it is.
Oh, don't do that, said Ruth. The writing's only on one side. Give me the papers and we can use the blank sides in school.
The lieutenant laughed. Sit down, he said, and I'll take your particulars, but I warn you, nothing will come of it.
Before going, Ruth was told to call back the next day. She called and found a pound of sugar, a pound of flour, and 6 blankets waiting for her.
It's more than you deserve, you little hussy, said Ivan. Sign here, and your address.
She wrote, bombed cellar, and told him where it was. A week later, with the help of the sugar and flour, a wood fire, and a biscuit tin for an oven, she was preparing a birthday tea. Most of the children had been invited. Suddenly, she heard a scuffle outside. She ran out and saw a soldier being attacked by a boy. There was a flash of a knife near the soldier's neck, and Jimpy was squawking and pecking at his ankles. "Jan, drop that knife at once!" Ruth cried, and flung herself into the struggle. They all rolled over in a heap, but she had caught Jan by the wrist and knocked the knife out of his hand.
That's a pretty welcome, I must say,
said Ivan the sentry as he picked up his cap. He tried to put it on his head, but the cock jumped on his shoulder and pecked his ear. Ruth drove it away, then picked up the knife. "Don't you understand, Jan? They're our friends," said Ruth. "They're soldiers," said Jan sulkily. "They're Russian soldiers, not Nazis. They've come to set us free and look after us." "I hate soldiers. They're all the same," said Jan. "I hate them." "I'm sorry about him, Ivan," said Ruth. "His manners are as bad as Jimpy's. Come inside. We're going to have a party. Come in, Jan." Everyone went in except Jan, who stayed outside sulking.
"So I chose the right day to call, young lady," said Ivan. "My word, a birthday! Too old to have them myself."
"You shall have the seat of honor, Ivan," said Ruth, and she gave him a box to sit on.
"Brought the present for you," he said, when he had settled comfortably. "Nothing much, but my kids at home are fond of it. Bar of chocolate."
"What's chocolate?" said Bronya, while Ruth thanked him. She wasn't the only one who wanted to know what chocolate was. There were 15 in the cellar. Ruth divided it into 15.
"Just a crumb each. They won't tell from that. Wish I brought some more," said Ivan. "But I didn't come here to bring chocolate. I've got news for you, young lady. We've traced your brother Edek. He's in a transit camp at Posen."
Ruth threw her arms round his neck.
"What would the wife say if she could see me now?"
said Ivan, and planted a loud kiss on Ruth's cheek. Then he handed her a slip of paper on which the name of the camp was written.
And here's something else might come in handy.
He gave her a large packet of typewriting paper and a bundle of pencils. Bronya clapped her hands for joy. "I'll draw lots of pictures of you, Ivan, rolling on the floor and having your ear pecked." At that moment, she saw Jan standing in the doorway. He was sobbing.
"Cheer up, son, I've forgiven you, even if you did want to cut off my head for a souvenir,"
said Ivan. But there was something for which Jan had not forgiven him. He held out his little wooden box. It was in pieces. "You rolled on it, you great brute."
"I'll mend it for you,"
said Ivan. Jan shook his head fiercely. "Jan, can't you stop hating for one moment?" said Ruth. As Jan clutched the broken pieces to his chest, something fell to the ground. It was the silver sword that Joseph had given him more than 2 years before. Ruth picked it up and looked at it. It was familiar. That dragon on the brass hilt. Then suddenly she recognized it as the birthday present her father had given her mother the last year before the war. Then she too began sobbing.
"What the works?"
said Ivan, puzzled and embarrassed.
"First it was kill me, then it was kiss me, and now it's the waterworks. Pardon me if I step outside and fetch my umbrella."
And he went back to his control post, wondering what to make of it all. While Bronya slept, Ruth and Jan sat up late that night, and Jan told her the little he remembered about her father. Why had the boy not spoken earlier about him? Surely he had been told the children's names. But Jan had forgotten them. War does strange things to young people. Months of strain had blotted from his memory many of the details of his meeting with Joseph. But he remembered the country he was bound for, Switzerland. Long after Jan fell asleep, Ruth lay awake thinking. By morning, she had sorted things out and knew what she must do. She explained the situation to Bronya. "We must go and find father." "Find mother too?" "Yes, mother too. We must go to Switzerland." "Where's that?" "Millions of miles away," said Jan. "And you'll have to walk." "Some of the way," said Ruth. "But Ivan will give us shoes and we'll get lifts on lorries and trains as well. It won't be so bad now spring's coming. We'll go to Posen first. It's only 200 miles. We can beg for food as we do now." "I'll steal it," said Jan. "You leave that to me." "I'm glad you want to come with us, Jan," said Ruth. "We need you to protect us." "I've got my knife," said Jan. "That will be very useful if you use it for what it's meant for," said Ruth. She went to see Ivan to explain matters and to ask him for shoes.
"I'll bring you anything I can," he said. "But tie up that cock next time I call."
He called the following week, with shoes for each of them. They saw him coming, and Ruth told Jan to tie up Jimpy. He didn't like doing it, but he obeyed.
"Hello, you starving ragamuffins," said Ivan. "You've not grown much fatter. Why don't you put him in the pot?" He jerked a thumb at Jimpy the cock, who was nearly strangling himself to break free of the string. "He's my friend," said Jan indignantly. "I don't eat my friends." Ivan grunted. "I admit he's a bit stringy. Not much gravy from him." Jan's fingers ran to his knife. Ivan said quickly, "Quite right, Jan. We don't put our friends in the pot however hungry we are. You and I are friends, aren't we? Here's some chocolate to make you fat, like me." He put his hand in his pocket, but there was nothing there. Then he saw that Jan was already eating the chocolate. "Oh, it's like that, is it?" said Ivan. "I brought you something else as well, made it myself, but I've changed my mind. I'll keep it." "I've got it," said Jan. From under his seat he produced a wooden treasure box, trim and neat, with the letters J-A-N burnt into the top. Ivan looked so astonished that Ruth couldn't help laughing, but she was angry with Jan. "If you don't say thank you, I'll break it," she said. "Thank you," snapped Jan. "You little animal," said Ruth. "It seems we shall have to leave you behind." "Can't stop me coming," said Jan. "You better take these back, Ivan." Ruth handed him the shoes he had brought for Jan. "And don't let him have them unless he apologizes." Now Jan had no shoes at all. The rags he had bound his feet with during the winter were worn out.
He endured the cold and the sharp stones for a week before he could bring himself to apologize. He went to the control post with cut feet, sobbing, truly repentant. He left a peace offering for Ivan, one of the treasures from his wooden box that he prized very highly. A dead, shriveled-up lizard. And he came back with his shoes. What happened to the lizard after the boy left is Ivan's secret. Spring was bursting and the sun blazed from a clear sky when Ruth, Jan and Bronya left Warsaw on their long journey to Switzerland. The children carried a day's food, blankets, the wooden box with the sword in it, and Jimpy the cock. Ruth had the blanket strapped to her back, Jan had the box under one arm, the cock under the other. A family passed, tugging a handcart. On it was a bedstead, 2 drawers without a chest, a bundle of clothes, and a sleeping baby. "Which way to Posen?" Ruth asked. "Follow us," they said. The children followed them along a narrow street between smoking rubble. When they came to a crossing, they said goodbye and turned onto the main road, which led westwards out of the city. It was crowded with refugees. Some were going one way, some the other. It didn't seem to matter which way, as long as they kept moving. On all their faces was the same dazed look. "I wish we could get a lift," said Jan. "Jimpy's tired of being carried and he doesn't like walking." The lorries that passed were all full with soldiers. "I like walking," said Bronya. She was proud of the shoes Ivan had brought her. Very few of the refugees had shoes. But she tired in the afternoon and was glad when a half-empty lorry gave them a lift. They sat in the back among tins of oil and petrol and ate their food. They were out in the country now. The fields were littered with derelict tanks, shell cases, dugouts, barbed wire. In some places, peasants were digging, but most of the land had gone out of cultivation. When the lorry set them down, it was evening, and they were 100 miles on their way. Tired, grateful, and with their hopes shining, they spent the night in a derelict farm. "Perhaps tomorrow we shall be in Posen," said Ruth, as she snuggled under her blanket with Bronya. "Shall we see Edek?" said Bronya. "Yes, we shall see Edek," said Ruth. She clasped Bronya close to her, and they fell asleep. But there were no lifts next day. All the lorries were full, and by evening they had covered only 20 miles. Bronya's feet were blistered, Jan was cross, and Jimpy was dazed with the jogging and hopping. On the afternoon of the 4th day, they reached Posen. The city was not as flat as Warsaw, for some of the buildings were still standing, and at the first control post, Ruth produced the paper Ivan had given her with Edek's name and address. She was directed to a large building by the river, a great sprawling barracks. The Russians had just taken it over from the Poles, and everything was in a muddle. The secretary was new and could not find the records about Edek. "He must be here," said Ruth. As the secretary turned up another file, Ruth described her brother carefully. "Did you say Edek Baliki?" said a man passing down the crowded corridor. He wore a white coat and had a stethoscope round his neck. "I sent them yesterday to the Vata camp with the other TB cases." Ruth tried to question him, but he was gone. "The camp's only a mile down the river," said the secretary. It was dark when they came to the camp. Ruth was carrying Bronya, who was asleep. Jan was carrying Jimpy's limp form. Someone led them into a dimly lit hall. It was gloomy and deadly quiet, a place of sick people. Edek had always been so lively and healthy that Ruth could not imagine him belonging here. The man who spoke to them remembered Edek well. "He was a wild boy, and would not stay with us," he said, and he sounded both weary and bitter. "Edek ran away. I cannot tell you where. We had no time to run after him. There are so many here who need our help. We cannot waste time on those who refuse it." The village of Kolina lay north of Posen. A sandy track led to it across the fields. This track was crowded with people, many of them children. For rumour had it that a large field kitchen had arrived in the village and a relief organisation was starting work. It was partly the thought of food and rest that sent Ruth, Bronya and Jan there, and partly the fact that everyone was going there and they were caught up in the stream. They were greeted by sounds of hammering, by laughter and shouting. Wooden huts were springing up all round the green, and a Russian field kitchen was busy preparing food. A relief officer divided the people into groups as they arrived. The 3 children were taken into a field which was crowded with youngsters, most of them sitting quietly on the ground.
"We're getting dinner ready now," they were told. "It will be your turn soon."
At the sound of a trumpet, they were shepherded into a queue, which dragged its way slowly, silently, and hungrily towards the kitchens. As they approached, Ruth caught in her nostrils the warm, cheering smell of soup. She watched the nearest cook busy with his ladle.
"The war's over, I tell you. Our Russian armies have met the Americans on the Elbe," he was saying. "Germany's done for. Wonderful news, isn't it? I don't know what's wrong with these children. You think it would cheer them up, but they don't seem to hear me. You, Sonny, you with the sick giraffe under your arm. Oh, it's a cock, is it? Aren't you glad the bombs have stopped dropping?"
But Jan's mind was on the bowl he was lifting up to be filled.
"Here's an extra dollop for the sick pal under your arm," said the cook. "Let's hope it'll make him sit up and crow. Next, please."
Someone slipped bread into Jan's hand, and sipping the soup, he shuffled on to find a corner to sit down. "Hey, look where you're going!" a voice cried. Jan tripped. He fell, still clutching the bowl, Jimpy tumbling too. The bowl broke. The soup drained into the dust. There were lumps of meat and bread and vegetable lying about. Up till now, the feeding had proceeded in silence. No one but the cooks and helpers seemed to feel the need to speak. Now, in a moment, all control vanished. The sight of the spilt food was too much for the orderly queue. They burst their ranks and sprang upon it, a rabble of wildly hungry children. Jan was the centre of a fighting scrum. Even Ruth had flung herself forward, and in spite of herself was struggling with the rest. The sudden onrush took the soldiers by surprise. They did what they could to restore order, but it was as if a dam had burst, and all they could do was stand aside till the waters had subsided. Jan, dirty and bruised, was the last to pick himself up. Jimpy lay quite still, his neck broken. The boy was too dazed to grasp what had happened. The broken bits of bowl had been squashed into the ground. Of the spilt food there was no sign. Someone took Jan by the elbow and made him sit down, placing a fresh bowl of steaming soup in his hands. Bronya had not been in the scrum at all. The cook had snatched her up and held her clear. And Ruth? There had been children on top and all around her, and someone's foot had been on her hair. She had reached blindly for the food and caught only a hand. For some reason or other, she clung onto the hand, and when everyone about her had got up and her hair was free, she had not let go. Then she looked to see whose hand it was. And it was Edek's. There was still something left of the railway station at Posen, and some trains were getting through to Berlin 250 miles to the west. In one of these trains, Ruth, Edek, Jan and Bronya were travelling. It was crowded with refugees. They leaned from the windows, stood on the footboards, lay on the carriage roofs. Ruth's family was in one of the open trucks, which was cold, but not quite so crowded. "I don't like this truck," said Bronya. "It jolts too much." "Every jolt takes us nearer to Switzerland," said Ruth. "Think of it like that, and it's not so bad." "It's a better truck than the others," said Jan. "It's got a stove, and we can scrape the coal dust off the floor. That's why I chose it. When it gets dark, they'll light a fire, and we shall keep warm." Ruth looked at her brother, bunched up against the side of the truck. It was over 2.5 years since she'd seen him. He was so different. His cheeks were pinched and hollow, his eyes as unnaturally bright as Jan's had once been, and he kept coughing. He looked as if he could go on lying there forever without stirring. Yet at the Warte camp, they had described him as wild. Bronya was asleep now, her head in Ruth's lap. Ruth sighed. She leaned back against the side of the truck and dozed, and the train, crammed to bursting point with refugees, rattled and jolted on towards Berlin. In the evening the train stopped and was shunted into a siding. As night came on and it grew colder, coal dust was scraped from the floorboards and wood collected from outside, and the fire in Ruth's truck kindled. The refugees crowded round. It was the hour of the singer and the storyteller. While they all shared what little food they had, a young man sang and his wife accompanied him on the guitar. He sang of the storks that every spring fly back from Egypt to Poland's countryside, and of the villagers that welcome them by placing cartwheels on the treetops and chimney stacks for the storks to build their nests on. A printer from Krakow told the tale of Krakus, who killed the dragon, and of Krakus's daughter, who refused to marry a German prince. Others, laughing and making light of their experiences, told of miraculous escapes from the Nazis. "I had a free ride on the roof of a Nazi lorry," said one. "It was 80 miles before I was seen. A sniper spotted me from the top of a railway bridge, but he couldn't shoot straight and I slid off into the bushes. The driver was so unnerved at the shooting he drove slap into the bridge and that was the end of him." Another told of a long journey on the roof of a train. "I can beat that for a yarn," said Edek. Everyone turned round to look at him, slumped at the back of the truck. "I'll tell you if you give me a peep at the fire," he said. "And my sisters too, and Jan. We're freezing out here." Ungrudgingly they made a way for the family, the only children in the truck, to squeeze through to the stove. Ruth carried Bronya and snuggled down beside it. Jan sat on the other side with his chin on his knees and his arms clasping them. Edek stood with his back to the side of the truck. When someone opened the stove to throw in a log, a shower of sparks leapt up, and for a few moments the flames lit up his pale features. "I was caught smuggling cheese into Warsaw, and they sent me to Germany to slave on the land," he said. "Slaves came from all parts of Europe, women mostly, and boys of my age. In winter we cut peat to manure the soil. We were at it all day from dawn to dark. In spring we did the sowing, cabbage mostly. At harvest time we packed the cabbage heads in crates and sent them into town. We lived on the outer leaves. They tasted bitter. I tried to run away, but they always fetched me back. Last winter, when the war turned against the Nazis and the muddles began, I succeeded. I hid under a train, under a cattle wagon, and lay on top of the axle with my arms and legs stretched out." "When the train started, you fell off," said Jan. "Afterwards I sometimes wished I had," said Edek. "That is, until I found Ruth and Bronya again. Somehow I managed to cling on, and I got a free ride back to Poland." Jan laughed scornfully. "Why don't you travel that way here? It would leave the rest of us more room." "I could never do that again," said Edek. "No," said Jan, and he looked with contempt at Edek's thin arms and bony wrists. "You're making it all up. There's no room to lie under a truck. Nothing to hold on to." Edek seized him by the ear and pulled him to his feet. "Have you ever looked under a truck?" he said, and he described the underside in such convincing detail that nobody but Jan would have questioned his accuracy. The boys were coming to blows when the printer pulled Jan to the floor, and there were cries of, "Let him get on with his story." "You would have been shaken off," Jan shouted above the din, "like a rotten plum." "That's what anyone would expect," Edek shouted back. "But if you'll shut up and listen, I'll tell you why I wasn't." When the noise had died down, he went on. "Lying on my stomach, I found the view rather monotonous. It made me dizzy, too. I had to shut my eyes. And the bumping. Compared with that, the boards of this truck are like a feather bed. Then the train ran through a puddle. More than a puddle, it must have been a flood, for I was soaked right through. But that water saved me. After that, I couldn't let go even if I wanted to." "Why not?" said Jan, impressed. "The water froze on me. It made an icicle of me. When at last the train drew into a station, I was encased in ice from head to foot. I could hear Polish voices on the platform. I knew we must have crossed the frontier. My voice was the only part of me that wasn't frozen, so I shouted. The station master came and chopped me down with an axe. He wrapped me in blankets and carried me to the boiler house. Took me hours to thaw out." "You don't look properly thawed out yet," said the printer, and he threw him a crust of bread. Other voices joined in. "Give him a blanket. A tall story, but he's earned a bed by the stove." Another story, somebody! One to make us forget! Put some romance into it." The stories petered out after a while. When all was quiet, and the refugees, packed like sardines on the floor of the truck, lay sleeping under the cold stars, Ruth whispered to Edek, "Was it really true?" "Yes, it was true," said Edek. "Nothing like that must ever happen to you again," said Ruth. She reached for his hand. It was cold, although he was close to the stove, and she clasped it tight, as if she meant never to let go of it again. It was the end of May when the train reached Berlin, after 9 days of stopping and starting, of lying up in sidings, of crawling along the battered track. The station was a shambles, but everyone was glad to escape from their cramped quarters. They swarmed out of the trucks and over the lines, some of them disappearing at once into the dusty ruins of Berlin. Most of them sat down on their luggage, hundreds of tired men, women and children, in the hope that they would be given food or told where to go. A few United Nations relief workers appeared, shouting orders in broken German, trying to make them stand in a queue. Carts piled with bread pushed their way through the mob, and there was some milk from the mothers and babies. But this was the second refugee train that had come in that day, and there was not enough food to go round. Hungry and unfed, the family were directed to a transit camp. They left the station shouting and laughing, for their spirits were high. Only a few weeks ago they were in Warsaw. 10 days ago, Edek had not been found, and now they were all together and had covered a third of the way to Switzerland. They did not seem to notice that everything round them had been destroyed. Perhaps it was because they were too used to it. Warsaw looked no different. Perhaps it was because the sun was shining, the birds were singing, and Switzerland was just round the corner. "Nobody's going hungry," said Jan, a mischievous grin on his face. Out of his shirt popped a long cigar-shaped loaf of bread. They all sprang to catch it. "I bet it cost you a pretty penny," said Edek sarcastically. "I borrowed it when the cart came round," said Jan. "In Germany, we call that organising," said Edek. There was more food for them at the transit camp, a disused cinema whose floor appeared to contain the entire population of Berlin. After 4 helpings of soup each, they were given blankets and straw-filled mattresses, and ushered into a dark corner of the hall. Here, a seedy-looking flag and a scribbled notice on the wall indicated that they were in Poland. The electricity was not working, and the only light came from hurricane lamps suspended from the balcony above. As far as they could see, the whole floor was carpeted with mattresses, and they threw down theirs where they stood. This was to be their home while they were in Berlin. It was warm and dry, and they were delighted, especially Bronya, who loved to hear Polish voices, as they made it feel like home. In spite of the crowded conditions, all was quiet and orderly in the hall, except at meal times. When they went up onto the balcony, people were content to lie about on their mattresses, smoking, reading, talking, playing cards. The night was so quiet that Edek felt ashamed of his coughing and tried to smother it in his blanket for fear of waking the sleepers. Then, in the early morning, when the first wakers were stirring, someone shrieked near the entrance. People heaved off their blankets, stood up, craned their necks to see what was happening. There was a general movement towards the entrance, stifled almost at once by another in the opposite direction. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, the noise died down, and all was quiet again. "What was it all about?" said Bronya. "Here's somebody who can tell us," said Ruth, as an excited new arrival, jumping from mattress to mattress, landed 3 jumps away. "A chimpanzee escaped from the zoo," the new arrival announced breathlessly. Jan was instantly alert. "There's nothing to be afraid of." "Thank the Lord the brute's taken itself off," said the man. "Those Greeks threw their boots at it. They've got some sense." "Stupid," said Jan. "The chimpanzee will copy them and someone will get hurt." He was ready to continue the argument, but the Pole on the mattress opposite was reading out from a German news sheet an article that demanded all his attention. "Chimpanzee escapes from zoo," he translated. "At large since Monday evening. Bistro the chimpanzee, who for some years has delighted visitors to the Tiergarten, escaped from his cage on Monday night. He was seen to board a tram in the Adolf Hitler Strasse, where he bit one of the terrified passengers before alighting at the next stop. The reader looked up from the news sheet and saw with some surprise that all Poland was standing on his mattress. Flattered, he continued. Bistro was one of the few animals to escape unhurt from the bombing of the Tiergarten, a highly intelligent and usually docile animal with a passion for cigarettes. He appears to have been much shaken by the months of bombing the city has endured. His keeper reports that he's been difficult to handle because of his sometimes violent moods. Anyone who sees him is advised to do nothing to anger him and to report at once to the police. The crowd dispersed, and the news sheet passed from hand to hand. It's a good thing Bistro took himself off, said Ruth. Jan would have saved us if he hadn't, said Bronya. Where is Jan? Said Edek. Jan had vanished. Later that week, a British officer was writing home to his wife. Dearest Jane, he wrote, my unit's been in Berlin a week now. You never saw such a place. Other cities were badly blitzed, but not on this scale. It's like a moon landscape, craters everywhere, mountains of rubble. The Reichstag and the Kaiser's palace are roofless, Unter den Linden piled with wreckage, and the queerest things keep happening. How's this for one? I've been attacked by a chimpanzee. On Wednesday, I was sitting in the jeep with my driver, studying a map. I had a cigarette in my mouth and was about to light it, when a hand slid over my shoulder and tweaked the cigarette out. I looked round and saw a chimpanzee on the back seat with the cigarette in his mouth. You never saw such a revolting creature. Huge arms, hairy chest, deep-set evil eyes, and the face of a heavyweight boxer. He could have knocked the pair of us into the middle of next month, but we didn't stay to let him. Quite a crowd was gathering, and I heard someone say the chimp was called Bistro and he'd escaped from the zoo. He had a chain round his neck and it kept clanking against the tailboard as he jumped up and down. He seemed to be in a rage because he hadn't any matches, or because he'd swallowed the cigarette. When he was tired of jumping, he sat down in the driver's seat and started fiddling with the controls. That put the wind up me. There was a goodish slope on the street, and 50 yards ahead a bomb crater big enough to swallow a church. Come on, Jim, I said to my driver. We'll have to do something about this. But my knees were like jelly. Then the strangest thing happened. A boy stepped out of the crowd, one of the thousands of urchins that abound in the ruins here, about 11 or 12 years old, I should say, but you can never tell with these kids, they're so undernourished. I shouted to him in German to come back, but he didn't understand. He was a Pole, and his name was Jan, though I didn't know that till afterwards. He walked right on, quite unafraid, and when he was alongside the jeep, he said in a gentle voice, "Hello, Bistro." The chimp gave him a dirty look, but Jan only grinned. He'd fished something out of a small wooden box he was carrying, and it made the chimp curious. It was a cigarette and matches. He handed over the cigarette, then the matches. Said Bistro, and he lit up at once and flung away the matches. He sat back in the driver's seat, inhaling, puffing out clouds of smoke from his nose, and all the while keeping his eyes fixed on Jan. Then Bistro did something to Jan that would have killed me dead of fright if I'd been in his place. He took the boy's hand in his, lifted it to his mouth, and bit his finger. Jan stood as still as a rock. Some sixth sense must have whispered to him what the chimp was up to. It wasn't a real bite, only a nip, and a token of friendship, so the keeper explained afterwards. When Bistro gave his hand to the boy in return, Jan knew what to do. He gave it a friendly nip with his teeth. Next thing I knew, Jan was leading him down the street by the chain. Only Bistro didn't wear it like a prisoner's chain, but with pride and glory, as if it were a chain of office. That's not quite the end of the story. As I strolled over, I saw a small silver sword, sort of paper knife, lying in the dust. 2 keepers had arrived by now, and were leading Bistro away. And Jan, seeing the lid of his wooden box was loose, checked through the contents in great agitation, then burst into tears. Showing him the silver sword, I asked if he'd lost it. The cloudburst ended abruptly, and out came the sun again. He seized it greedily. It didn't seem worth all the fuss to me, but evidently he attached some importance to it. I invited Jan round to my lodgings for dinner. He looked as if he hadn't had a square meal since he was born, and he turned up promptly with 3 other Polish children as skinny as himself. Luckily, Frau Schmidt's larder with its army rations was equal to the occasion. One of them, a 16-year-old lad named Edek, with a cough like a foghorn, spoke some German, so I learned all about them. They're on their way to Switzerland to find their parents, started from Warsaw last month. Jan doesn't really belong. Ruth, the eldest, about 17, picked him up half dead and adopted him. She's a remarkable girl, quiet and self-assured, with the most striking eyes. They have a deep serenity, a sense of purpose, and moral authority quite unmistakable. No wonder they look up to her as a mother, and a leader too. Edek is brave and intelligent, and looks as if he had suffered a lot. He spent nearly 2 years slaving for the Nazis. You can see it in his face. A kid's face oughtn't to be creased and pinched like his. I wonder if he'll hold out. Switzerland's a long way. The one that took my fancy most was Bronya, the youngest. Blue eyes, very fair hair. She seemed to live in a dream world, like our own Jenny, as I remember her on my last leave. I scrounged some clothes and army rations for them, and they left in the afternoon singing at the top of their voices. It went right to my heart. Tomorrow they start on the next stage of their long journey. 750 miles. That's all, dear. More next week. My love to you and a special hug for Jenny. Mark. P.S. Frau Schmidt had the cheek to wake me up in the night to tell me some of her silver was missing, and she accused those Polish children. I couldn't have cared less. They could have walked off with half the house for all I minded. Really, these Germans. They spend 5 years looting Europe and then come crying to you in the middle of the night because someone's pinched a jam spoon. We found the missing silver in the letterbox next morning. I bet my bottom dollar it was Jan who pinched it. You never saw such a mischievous face. And Ruth, who made him take it back. She's got as firm a hold over that family as Jan had over the chimp. The family crossed the Elbe near Goslar by a bridge that had not been too badly damaged. Here they were held up for half a day by a Russian army bound, so rumour had it, for Prague, to drive the Germans out of Czechoslovakia. Never before had Ruth seen so many soldiers. First came the tanks. Next, column after column of marching soldiers. Over the bridge they poured in their thousands, while everyone stood by to let them pass. They were hardly across when screaming horns announced the staff cars. Next, cars with secretaries, cars with war booty, fur coats, textiles, carpets, looted china, lorries with furniture, radios, refrigerators, food. More marching columns. Columns of women and girls in grey-green uniform to do the cooking and washing and look after the sick. The whole world's gone by. Surely there can't be any more people left, said Bronya, as the dust began to subside. But there was still the rear guard to come, and soon the dust was flying again under the wheels of hundreds of small carts drawn by Cossack horses. "Now for a lift!" cried Jan, as a grey old man, whip in hand, came rattling by in a cart with a canvas roof, and before Ruth could stop him, he had hauled himself over the tailboard. "We'll never catch him! The carts are all full!" cried Ruth. But soon an open cart with nothing in the back but a heap of straw and a leg of smoked pork picked them up. It was an anxious ride, for what with the dust and the overtaking and the spreading out into fields on either side of the road, they quickly lost sight of Jan. As it happened, the whole caravan halted at dusk to camp for the night. Fires were kindled, and there was eating and drinking and singing, and Jan was quickly found and forgiven. Next day, the family struck out across the country in the direction of Bitterfield and Halle. Before they left Berlin, the British officer had provided them with ration cards, and with the money he had given them, they were able to buy food. For recapturing the chimp, Jan had been rewarded with 100 marks, but when at last the money ran out, they were dependent on what they could beg or work for. Work was difficult to find, for the factories were idle and farms had absorbed the first prisoners of war to be released. Some villages refused to admit them, having neither food nor shelter for any more refugees, but for the most part they met with kindness and were not refused food if it could be spared. Most big towns had their UNRWA food kitchens, and these were always welcome. But best of all were the transit camps. Had they stayed there, they would have received all the food, schooling and medical attention they needed. Edek was very tired and needed rest, but whenever he was tempted to linger, one peep at the silver sword was enough to spur him on again. Each day the sun smiled down upon them, upon toilers in the fields where the fresh crops were springing, upon towns littered with the debris of war, upon a people numbed by defeat, upon women standing in bread queues or wheeling barrows of wood collected in the forest, upon wounded soldiers sitting on hospital balconies. Some of the soldiers waved to the family as they passed, and they waved back. So they came to the edge of the Russian zone. They crossed the frontier somewhere in the Thuringian forest, without realizing they'd done so, and it was only the unfamiliar uniforms of the soldiers and the strange language that told them they had reached the American zone. It was the middle of June. In spite of the long spell of unbroken weather, Edek was no better. At night, as they lay under the bright stars, his cough would keep Ruth awake and she could not throw off her anxiety. Each day, his walking became slower and more painful, and Ruth decided he must rest for a week. They found a pleasant site in a meadow by a mill stream. Ruth took a cleaning job at the local school, while Jan went haymaking, and Edek rested under the trees with Bronya to look after him. All day he lay in the shade, for the sun was scorching hot. At night a chill wind blew, but he was warm, for they'd lit a fire and he lay beside it, looking up at the stars that peeped between the willow branches, till he was lulled to sleep by the gentle music of the stream. So he rested well, and ate well too, for there was no shortage of food. Several times Jan came home from work with a bag full of such food as they'd never tasted before: chicken, lobster, salted pork, and luncheon meat. When Ruth asked where it came from, he said, "From the farmer. He's a generous man." But her suspicions were not quietened, for it was all in tins and labelled in a strange language. "I know he's stealing it," she told Edek. "It's American food. If he's thieving it from the depot, he'll get caught. The Americans don't miss much." Edek was determined to clear up the mystery. The next afternoon he went alone to the farm where Jan worked and hid behind a hedge. He saw Jan leave the haymaking and hurry off. Edek followed him to a level crossing outside the town. Suddenly, a ragged youth sprang out of a bush by the roadside and beckoned. Jan slipped down from the road to join him. Edek crept as close as he could without making his presence known. Then Jan ran half-doubled along the railway line in the direction of the signal ramp. The youth had disappeared. Edek saw Jan swarm up the side of the signal ramp. It extended right across the track, and lie down on top above the line. What was he up to now? Edek walked to the foot of the ramp. "What's the game, Jan?" he called. Jan was startled. He swore at Edek and told him to go away. With a clank of metal that took them both by surprise, the signal on the up line changed to green. "Go away, you fool!" Jan screamed, and, flinging himself at the signal, he began to tug at it. Edek was really agitated now, for he could hear the distant rumble of an approaching train. He shouted to Jan to calm down, but the boy was working furiously and paid no heed. The noise of the train grew louder. Puffs of smoke rose above the trees. Edek sprang up the ramp and started to climb. It was not an exercise for which he was well fitted. He had already spent most of his small reserves of strength. Gasping and coughing, he somehow hauled himself up. When his head appeared over the top, he saw that the signal had changed to red. Jan was slithering backwards like an eel in a frantic hurry. His feet scraped past Edek's face. As he passed, his eyes were blazing with fury, but because of the din of the train, Edek could not hear what he said. With no thought in his head but to prevent an accident, Edek, as the goods train approached, tottered upright and waved. He need not have done so, for the signal was at red where Jan had put it, and the engine screeched to a standstill. A hiss of steam, a long shrill whistling, a dark cloud, and a great swallowing of filthy smoke. When Edek had finished coughing and wiped the smoke from his eyes, an American military policeman was pointing a revolver at him. Captain Greenwood, of the American Army of Occupation, was a lawyer in his hometown. His experience fitted him well for his present role of trying petty cases, and he went to great trouble to be just. This was seldom easy, as nothing was straightforward in this foreign country, and the need for interpreters made the hearing of evidence a slow business. The boy before him was a strange case. Edek Baliki, 16, a Pole of no address, caught interfering with train signals. The prosecutor, Lieutenant James, claimed he was one of a gang of train robbers and had been seen halting a train. The boy admitted having halted the train, but denied the rest of the charge. As nobody had robbed the train, the case could not be proved. Pressed to give some reason for his action, Edek replied that it was a prank. Captain Greenwood was puzzled. The boy was obviously ill, and did not look the sort to delight in pranks of that nature. There was a sudden stir at the back of the court, and a corporal came forward with a message. After a few moments of whispered conversation, Captain Greenwood said,
"Sure, if they can help, show them in."
Ruth, Jan and Bronya were shown in to stand beside Edek. Bronya was holding Ruth's hand and grinning happily. Jan was biting his lip. His eyes were defiant. "There's been a mistake, and I've come to explain," said Ruth in Polish. "This is Jan. It's all his fault. I want to speak for him." The interpreter translated.
"Who is the other child?"
said Captain Greenwood. "My sister Bronya," said Ruth. "She has nothing to do with this, but I had to bring her along as I've nowhere to leave her. We're on our way to Switzerland and are camping by the mill stream."
"I see. What's the boy's full name?" said Captain Greenwood.
"Only Jan," said Ruth.
"Jan, have you any parents?"
said Captain Greenwood.
"The grey cat and Jimpy, but they're dead, and Ruth's my mother now,"
said Jan sullenly. Captain Greenwood could make nothing of this. Ruth did her best to explain a situation she did not fully understand herself.
"We take it then that this young lady, Ruth Baliki, is your guardian," said Captain Greenwood. "You claim that Edek Baliki is wrongly accused. Lieutenant James here will read the charge, and it will be translated for you. Listen carefully, Jan, and answer our questions."
The charge of halting the train and attempted robbery were read, and the prisoner was asked,
"Guilty or not guilty?"
Jan's answer was to make a bolt for the door, where 2 guards seized him and brought him back, kicking and biting. The judge spoke severely, but without effect. He turned to Ruth.
"Have you any control over the boy?"
"He's scared of the soldiers," said Ruth. "If you kindly send those guards outside, sir, I think he'd behave himself." One glance at the struggle in front of him convinced Captain Greenwood that extraordinary measures were justifiable. He told the guards to release the prisoner and wait outside. Jan collapsed on the floor, panting and angry, his eyes flashing. Captain Greenwood waited for him to calm down, then asked him to stand up. To his surprise, the boy obeyed.
"We're here to know the truth," he said, abandoning all formality. "Now, Jan, will you tell us what happened?"
Jan looked round the court suspiciously. "Jan, no hanky-panky," Ruth said. "If you try that, you know what you'll get." Jan tried to see what she was holding behind her back, but he had to guess. With lowered eyes, he addressed the judge.
"It's not Edek's fault.
I changed the signal and he came to stop me. I ran away and he was caught. He needn't have been caught, but he's very stupid for a boy of his age. He makes a mess of everything."
"What made you want to stop the train?"
said Captain Greenwood. "The food trucks."
"You were going to raid them yourself?"
"No.
You were one of a gang?
Yes.
Was Edek Baliki a member?
No, he had nothing to do with the business.
Who were the others?
You mean the train robbers? I don't know anything about them. If I did, I wouldn't tell. Those soldiers outside can go and sniff them out. Ruth produced a stick from behind her back and gave Jan a good clout on the rear. That's for being rude, she said. The clout had the desired effect, and he apologized. Captain Greenwood asked Lieutenant James,
Are you satisfied that the prisoner is guilty of the charge?
Perfectly. Captain Greenwood turned to Jan and spoke gently.
Why do you go in for stealing when you can get plenty to eat at the food kitchens?
We can't live otherwise, said Jan bitterly.
It has become a habit, a bad habit, said Captain Greenwood.
The Nazis stole everything from our country and left us with nothing, said Jan. Now it's our turn to steal from them.
But this is American food, not Nazi food. It is sent here to feed you and all the other refugees. If you steal it, you are robbing your own people. Do you think that is right or sensible?
I want to feed Ruth and Bronya and Edek, said Jan fiercely. And the captain's unexpected gentleness brought tears rolling down his cheeks. Edek is ill and we're all hungry. I shall always steal if they're hungry.
Do they steal?
No, they're not as clever as I am. But everybody else does, even the Americans. They take cameras and glasses from the Germans. There's 100 cases of wine in your canteen, all stolen. I know where they got it from.
Those are not proper observations, said Captain Greenwood. It won't help your case to bandy wild accusations. If there's any truth in them, they'll be brought to my notice and dealt with.
Ruth slipped an arm round Jan's shoulders and whispered something as he fought to choke back the sobs. Jan fumbled for an apology. At last he said, I speak with respect, sir. A phrase which, coming from his lips, sounded so comic that the captain could not help smiling.
When I was your age, Jan, I was brought up on the 10 Commandments. Maybe they're out of fashion now. One of them is thou shalt not steal. Ever heard of it?
It doesn't work, said Jan.
It must be made to work, or everything will go to pieces. Don't forget that.
Captain Greenwood summed up briefly and passed sentence.
Edek Baliki, not guilty, case dismissed. Jan has pleaded guilty. Under the circumstances, I shall deal with him as lightly as I can. 200 marks fine or 7 days.
There was a brief consultation between Ruth and Jan. Then Ruth spoke. Jan says he'll take the detention. We haven't enough money to pay the fine.
It isn't long, Jan, and you'll be looked after, said Captain Greenwood. When you come out, stick to that mother, as she's old enough not to have forgotten what decent behavior is.
There were queer noises in the barn, louder than the scurrying of rats. The farmer flung the door open and shouted, "Come out of there, you young devil! I heard you! Can't you imitate a rat better than that?" He stood still, accustoming his eyes to the half-darkness. It was not full daylight yet, and all he could see was a vague blur of hay. "Come out!" he shouted. "Do I smoke you out like rabbits, or fetch the prong?" The threats were ineffective, so he went to fetch the prong. Soon the hay was flying. And something else came flying too. An overripe turnip, which struck the farmer full in the nape of the neck. He swore. An anxious voice piped up. "We give in. Please put that horrible thing away before it goes straight through Bronya." And the farmer turned, his prong poised in mid-air, to find himself face to face with the tall, thin girl, her hair bristling with bits of hay. "We only spent the night here. We haven't done any harm." When she realized he had not properly understood, Ruth called Edek. The hay at the farmer's feet parted, and Edek's face appeared. "Hey, that's me you're stepping on!" shrilled Bronya as she emerged from under the farmer's left foot. And when she saw the murderous prong, she flew to Ruth and hid behind her. "Edek, tell him we haven't done any harm," said Ruth. Edek translated. "No harm?" exclaimed the farmer, removing a splodgy mess from inside his shirt collar. "I suppose you call this a birthday present?" The reply was another wet turnip landing on exactly the same spot. The last member of the family, who was certainly no diplomat, now came sliding down from the top of the hay, for no other reason than that he had run out of ammunition. Bronya giggled, but Ruth was angry. "When will you grow up, you silly little boy?" she said, seizing him by the shoulders and shaking him like a puppy. "You spoil everything for us." Jan, who had as usual acted from the highest of motives, began to protest. "Don't go for me, Ruth. I haven't stolen anything. The larder window was open all night. I could have taken anything, but I didn't." "On your knees and apologize," said Ruth. He didn't go on his knees, but he did mutter that he was sorry. The farmer was gracious enough to take the apology in good part. "Now, Mr. Interpreter," he said to Edek, "perhaps you'll be good enough to explain your presence here." Briefly, Edek told him who they were, where they'd come from, where they were going, and why they had not, as they usually did, asked permission last night to sleep in the barn. They had arrived after dark, and had not liked to disturb the household. "We'll willingly pay for our night's lodgings with a day's work," he finished.
"Of course," said the farmer. "And if I'm not satisfied with you, I'll hand you over to the burgomaster."
"What's a burgomaster?" said Bronya, when Edek had interpreted.
"A burgomaster, my dear, is a nasty bogeyman who plagues everybody. He'll be particularly interested in you. There's an order out from the military government that all Poles are to be rounded up and sent back to Poland. That's the burgomaster's job."
"We've just come from Poland and we're not going back," said Ruth. "We're going to Switzerland to find our mother and father," said Bronya. "Nothing on earth would send me back to Poland," said Edek.
"Nor me,"
said Jan.
"That's what you think. But if the military government decide you must go back, my lad, neither rotten turnips nor anything else will save you," said the farmer. "Now, come and have breakfast."
There were window boxes on the sills of the farmhouse, gay with flowers. On the scrub table in the kitchen, a breakfast of coffee and rolls had been laid.
"Emma!"
called the farmer.
4 tattered bundles of mischief from Poland for breakfast. Ruth, Edek, Jan and Bronya. They've walked all the way specially to meet us. This is Frau Wolf, my wife. She speaks Polish. Learned it from 2 Poles who worked here during the war."
A plump and comfortable-looking lady shook hands with them and went to fetch more breakfast. "What's that mess on your collar, Kurt?" she asked when she came back.
"A present from Poland," said the farmer,
winking at Jan, and when Edek translated, they all laughed so much that they nearly spilt the coffee. "It was a clean shirt this morning," she complained.
"Then I shall ask Jan to wash it for me, just to show my appreciation."
"That's a wonderful idea," said Ruth.
"No doubt Jan would have thought of it himself, only I beat him to it,"
said the farmer, winking at Ruth. "Eat all you can," said Frau Wolf, depositing a plate of rolls on the table. "There's plenty more when you've finished this lot." Bronya's eyes were wide with astonishment. Never had she seen so much food. "You have made us so welcome," said Ruth. "I feel somehow as if you'd been expecting us."
"Oh, you get to expect anything in these parts," said the farmer between gulps of coffee. "The woods are full of refugees like yourselves. We've had dozens working here at one time or another. Now, the military government sent us nothing but German prisoners of war. Holy onions, did you ever hear such nonsense? As if you could teach a mechanic how to milk a cow. He'd tried with a spanner if you didn't tell him how."
Edek said, "I worked on a German farm during the war, but I hated every moment. The people weren't decent, like you." The farmer appeared to take this harmless observation as an insult.
"You think I'm decent, do you? Just wait till I've wrung a day's work out of you. You'll think very differently then. We'll start as soon as you've done eating."
"Let them rest today, Kurt," said his wife. "They're worn out."
The farmer thumped the table with his fist. "I don't believe in treating people soft. Treat them rough and they respect you. Give them the milk of kindness and it'll turn sour. No, they'll start right now. Ruth and Jan shall come with me to the hayfield. Bronya can feed the hens. And Edek—"
"Edek shall stay in the kitchen to help me," said his wife. "A breeze would snuff him out." and the look she gave her husband made it clear she intended to have her way in this matter.
"Jan, you rascal! Don't imagine I'll let you forget my shirt,"
said the farmer, thumping the table so the crockery jumped. And as far as Jan was concerned, the farmer had his way. Kurt Wolf's farm was high up in the thickly wooded Bavarian hills, where the river Falcon came twisting down on its way to join the Danube. A road passed through the field at the foot of the farm, northwards towards Berlin, southwards to the plains beyond the Danube. A few miles downstream was the village of Boding, where each day the burgomaster received his unwelcome orders from the American troops stationed there. He was a tall, thin man in late middle age, who was conscientious in a rather stupid way. As go-between for his own people and the occupying power, he was answerable to both, and invariably received more kicks than praise. In the eyes of the family, he was the devil himself. His present instructions were to round up all Polish refugees and dispatch them home. So the farmer had offered to keep the family with him till the scare was over. They were only too pleased to accept. Jan, whom the farmer always referred to as the ex-convict, was particularly happy. He made friends with an elderly mongrel dog named Ludwig. It followed him all over the farm, wherever he happened to be working, and he worked hard and with enjoyment. Once, the burgomaster paid a surprise visit, but the noise of his jeep rattling up the drive was warning enough, and they managed to reach the attic in time. They lay there in the dust till he had gone. To their annoyance, the attic window was blocked up, and they failed to get a peep at him. Later, when they were down in the parlour, Jan pointed to a man's photo on the mantelpiece and said, "Does the burgomaster look like that?" "Oh, no," said Frau Wolf. Ruth was admiring the smiling face of the young man in the photograph. She asked who it was. "That's my eldest son," said Frau Wolf. "Father took the photo on his last leave." "You never told us you had any children," said Edek. "We haven't," said Frau Wolf. "Hans was killed at a place called Tobruk. Rudolf, he's in the other photo, standing at the back in uniform. Rudolf died later, fighting to keep the Russians out of Warsaw." "You mean he was in General Model's army?" said Edek. "Yes." "We might have seen him," said Jan, who was peering intently at the figure in the photo. "They used to hide in the ruins and take pot shots at us if we dared to come out of our rabbit holes. We hated them." "I like them," said Bronya. "They used to give me sweets." "That was the Russians. You've got the wrong army," said Jan. "Some of the Germans were nice," said Ruth, "especially in the early days of the war." Jan looked at Frau Wolf, quietly intent on her knitting, then at the farmer, whose eyes had a gleam of sadness. That there could be any connection between these homely folk and the soldier in the photo was beyond his understanding. After a moment he turned to the farmer and said, "You and I ought to be deadly enemies."
"The only deadly enemy you have," said the farmer, "is the burgomaster."
"You wouldn't have hated Rudolf, Jan," said Frau Wolf. "How'd you know?" "Because he loved Ludwig in the same way you do. He trained him to be the best watchdog we ever had. He pined away when Rudolf was called up. But now you've come, he's almost as fit as he used to be. You're like Rudolf in other ways, too." "Oh?" said Jan. "He was sent to Warsaw to kill us," said Ruth. "I don't suppose he wanted to. If he were here now, he would treat us as friends, as you do, Frau Wolf. It all seems so stupid and senseless." "You'd like to be our mother, wouldn't you, Frau Wolf?" said Bronya. "Yes, my dear, I would. I'd like to have you all. But you've got your own mother, and the most we can do is try to help you find her." She turned to Jan. "You have no mother, Jan. Would you like to stay here?" "Yes, I would. Because of Ludwig. But I'd rather go with Ruth. Anyway, the sword wouldn't let me stay here, however much I wanted to." "What sword?" said Frau Wolf. Jan fetched it from his treasure box. "It's beautifully made," said Frau Wolf. "Where did you get it?" He told her how Joseph Balicki had given it to him long ago, how Ruth had discovered it, how it had been ever since a pledge that Joseph was still alive and waiting for them, how when their spirits flagged, it gave them hope and inspired them to go on. Then he put it on the mantelpiece beside the photo of Rudolph, and a shaft of sunshine from the window caught it and made the silver blade sparkle. The farmer was at the kitchen sink, washing the morning's grime from his face. His wife was always complaining that he left most of it on the towel instead of in the water. On this occasion, he was running true to form, for his eyebrows were still white and foamy with soap when he reached out to dry himself. The towel wasn't there.
"Emma!" he shouted. "Will you never learn to put out a fresh towel when the soiled one goes to the wash? Emma!"
He heard heavy footsteps, and a towel was slipped into his hands.
"Thank you, my dear," he said.
And when he'd wiped off all the soap and it was safe to open his eyes, he saw before him not his wife, but the burgomaster.
"Oh, it's over the back of the chair,"
said the burgomaster, and he sat down on the edge of the kitchen table.
"I envy you your farm, Gerd. It's so peaceful. Cows grazing, sowing and reaping, the eternal rhythm of the seasons. You're down to the things that really matter. You can have my job any day. All kicks and no halfpence. The Americans curse me, and when I call on our own people, I know they'd cut my throat if they could get away with it. I've come to requisition their houses, their furniture, their radios, their food." "Get to the point, Mr. Burgomaster. You want something out of me. What is it?"
"All Polish refugees are to be sent home, and tomorrow's the final date allowed."
"Oh, that's stale news. I've lost the last of my refugees weeks ago, and you know it."
"You're hiding Polish children here," said the burgomaster. "They must go home like the rest."
"Well, they don't want to. Their parents are in Switzerland, and they're going to find them."
The burgomaster laughed. "I've heard that one before. Anyone in trouble at home always makes for the West, France or Switzerland. Swiss are getting very choosy. Too many nasty pieces have been getting through. Political troublemakers, secret agents. Even if we let these children go, and there's no chance of that, the Swiss wouldn't play. Not without proof that one parent was already in the country."
"Emma!" the farmer called out. "Is Edek about the place?"
Frau Wolf answered from upstairs. "He's out in the yard."
"Will you tell him the burgomaster would like to meet him?"
The farmer took the silver sword from the mantelpiece and showed it to the burgomaster.
"Here's proof their tale isn't moonshine."
And he told him the story of the sword. The burgomaster laughed. "Only a fool will accept that as proof. The mother's either dead by now or back in Poland, and there's not a chance in 1,000 that the father got through Germany alive." "I know he's alive," said Edek, who'd just come in. "I know it in my heart." And he took the sword from the burgomaster and put it back on the mantelpiece.
"Were you in the fighting at Warsaw?"
the burgomaster asked. "Yes," said Edek. "I was in the boys' rifle brigade. I joined when I was 12. Some weeks ago, 2 of my villagers were shot by a Polish boy not much older than you. Like you, he had learned his job in the boys' rifle brigade. He climbed through the bedroom window and shot these people while they slept. He had nothing against them. I don't think he even knew who they were. You understand why we have to be careful? There have been other cases, too. Ever since the war ended, the woods have been the hiding place of refugees who loot mercilessly and murder for revenge. Of course, they're not all like that, but it is in everyone's interest that they should go home. The Americans are inflexible on this point." "Will he let us go, Edek?" said Ruth, who had come in with Bronya, Jan and Ludwig. "No," said Edek.
"A lorry will come for you tomorrow at 12 midday," said the burgomaster. "I shall expect you to be ready. I warn you not to try to escape. The road is guarded. The woods are patrolled too, and the Americans may shoot at sight."
Ruth, who had followed the gist of this, began to plead with him in Polish. She told Edek to beg him to take their case direct to the Americans.
"Quite hopeless," said the burgomaster wearily. "It has been tried many times with no success."
"Goodbye." He bowed stiffly and went. In a cloud of dust, the burgomaster's jeep sped off down the farm track towards the main road. The farmer did not normally milk the cows himself. That was left to others. But when he felt depressed or in need of a little reflection, he sometimes took his turn. To sit on a stool with his forehead pressed against a cow's flank and the milk splashing between his fingers into the pail, this, he found, was an attitude which inspired reflective thought. All afternoon he'd been wondering how to beat the burgomaster and get the family safely away. Having by milking time found no solution, he took himself to the cowshed. And there, at the 15th splash into the pail, the idea sprang into being. As soon as the milking was done, he assembled the family and took them up into the attic. Under a dusty heap of broken cases, the boys' skis and some old boots, he found 2 long canvas bags, their leather handles green with mildew.
"Ruth and Jan can take this one. Edek can help me with the other," said the farmer. "Mind, they're heavier than they look."
Mystified, the family did as they were told. In a pother of dust by no means to Frau Wolf's liking, she was rolling pastry, the bags were dumped on the kitchen floor. She made them take them into the yard.
"Gently, gently," said the farmer as they fumbled clumsily with the fastenings.
Ruth's bag was the first open. On top of musty lengths of stuff, was it canvas, was it rubber, lay a bundle of sticks with metal clasps at the end. Now the other bag was open, and the contents looked similar.
"I'll assemble the one while you all watch," said the farmer. "You can do the other yourselves."
And when asked for the umpteenth time what it was all about, all he would say was, "Ah." Out came the sticks first, and with the metal clasps, the farmer joined them together so they grew into a skeleton, and before the farmer had started to give it flesh, Jan cried out, "A canoe!"
"It's a bit of a gamble," said the farmer, "but your only chance. Has any of you ever canoed before?"
"Yes," said Ruth and Edek both together. "Father took us one summer in the Pianini Mountains," said Ruth. "We hired 2-seaters to take us downstream."
"One of these is a 2-seater, said the farmer. "They belong to my sons. Have you tried wild water?"
The Dunacek wasn't particularly wild, except in one place where there were some rocks sticking out, said Edek.
"There are only 2 difficult patches on the Falcon River," said the farmer. "The rapids, 10 kilometers below the village, and the part where the river joins the Danube. But keep to midstream and you'll be all right."
He did not tell them just how tricky the rapids were, nor did he drop a hint of his other fear. The canoes were years old. Would they still hold the water out? Working together, Edek and Jan assembled the second canoe. After a time, soiled and battered but recognizable, 2 canoes lay stretched out on the ground.
"Of course, we'll have to try them out," said the farmer. "And it's advisable to leave that till after dark."
"What about the paddles?" said Edek. A second visit to the attic produced 3 double paddles. The farmer packed the family off to a meal and bed. They must get a few hours' rest, for many things could go wrong. Much luck and not a little skill would be needed for the venture to succeed, but it was their only chance. The moon had not yet risen when, with tractor and trailer, the farmer carried the canoes down to the river. The larger one was all right, but the single-seater leaked in several places. The top skin of waterproof linen seemed sound enough. It was the underskin of rubberized cloth which needed attention. Working by torchlight, the farmer made the best job of it he could. Soon after 3 a.m., 4 sleepy-eyed youngsters were bundled into the trailer and driven over the bumpy track down to the river. Frau Wolf sat with them. "I found the waterproofs which go with the canoes," she told them. "Mind you fit them tightly round the splashboards, or you'll get swamped. And I've packed you up some food as well." Reaching the river, the farmer shut off the engine. Under the dark trees they could see the river only dimly, but the gentle rushing sound of the water was music in their ears. On, on to the Danube, on to Switzerland, it sang. "Say goodbye to Ludwig for me," said Jan. "I shall miss him dreadfully."
Listen, all of you, said the farmer. Your safety depends on your not making any stupid mistakes. Edek and Jan, you'd better have the 2-seater. We'll stow the luggage with you. Put on these waterproofs. The elastic grips round your faces and wrists and round the splashboard. They'll keep the water out of the canoe. Ruth and Bronya, you'll both have to fit into one waterproof as best you can.
When they were all aboard and the little luggage they had was safely stowed, he gave them final instructions.
It's only 50 kilometers to the Danube, so you've not far to go. Keep to midstream where you can. There's no need to paddle much except in the broken water when there are rocks. For the rest, just keep the canoes headed straight, and the current will do all the work. If you get into difficulties, draw into the side. Remember, not a sound as you pass the village. There's no moon now, and you shouldn't be seen. But if there's any firing, lie as flat as you can. Goodbye, and good luck to you.
God bless you, my dears, said Frau Wolf. We can never thank you enough for all you've done for us, said Ruth. I'll paint a picture of the farm with both of you in it, and I'll remember you forever, said Bronya. The 2 boys waved their paddles. The farmer gave each bow a gentle push. Ruth, tightly squeezed with Bronya inside the ashwood rim of the single-seater, drove hard in with her paddle and headed for midstream, with Edek and Jan close behind. Glancing back, she saw the 2 pale figures under the trees waving silently. The darkness quickly swallowed them. They were in the grip of the current now, floating steadily downstream. Edek and Jan were a length behind. Ruth could hear the splash of their paddles and Jan's voice calling. She backed water till they drew alongside. Don't shout, Jan. We're down at the bows. There's something very heavy inside, Ruth. Jan lifted the waist of his waterproof clear and reached underneath. Ow! It's wriggling. It's alive and wet. The wet thing was the nose. Ludwig thrust up eagerly for air, licking Jan's fingers and wriggling with delight. As for Jan, even if this stowaway meant shipwreck, he could not have been better pleased. The current was swift. In the darkness, the great wooded hills swept by. For a moment, the moon peeped from a cloud and turned the stream silver. Stay away, moon, Ruth muttered. Don't come out till we've passed the village. Side by side, the canoes sped on. On the left bank, the hills curved downwards. Were those dim shapes houses? Again the moon appeared. It had chosen quite the wrong moment, for this was indeed the village, with houses crowded about both banks. With a tightening of fear in her throat, Ruth realized if they were spotted now, they would be taken back. Look out for the bridge, said Edek. Aiming for the centre of the 3 arches, Edek's canoe shot under the arch and disappeared into the shadows. Too far to the right, Ruth got caught in sluggish water. She drifted broadside onto the base of the arch. The water was noisy and Ruth did not hear the footsteps on the bridge, but she saw a man's shadow on the water. She paddled frantically to get free. The water's coming in. I can feel it under me, said Bronya. A man shouted, and his shadow leaned far out over the water. The canoe was still across the base of the arch, with the water thrusting against each end, threatening to break its back. Ruth jabbed hard with the paddle and managed to ease it a little. A pair of legs dangled over the parapet and scraped against the stone. With a last effort, she thrust at the stonework, and the canoe broke free. But the soldier had clambered down and jumped into the water where it was shallow at the side. He caught the paddle and clung on. Ruth tugged, twisted, then let go, and the canoe swung sideways into the shadows under the arch. The soldier, not expecting her to let go, toppled over backwards with a splash into the river. As the canoe shot out beyond the bridge, Ruth realized she was at the mercy of the current. Bronya had no paddle and could not help. Shots from the bridge whizzed past her cheek, and she pushed Bronya's head down against the canvas. Then the moon went behind a cloud, and the darkness hid her. But the current drove them wherever it chose. On and on they sped, helpless, the water foaming against the bows, spitting and bubbling against the canvas. "I'm sitting in the river," said Bronya. "Edek! Jan!" Ruth shouted. As they rounded a bend, they were thrust towards the right bank. The river was quieter here, and soon they felt the canoe scrape over pebbles and slow to a halt. They were stuck. There was a pale light in the sky now, and the hills stood out dark against it. Ruth could make out rocks in the water. "We'll have to get out," she said. They stepped into the water, which was little more than ankle deep, and at once the canoe floated. With the painter in her hand and Bronya beside her, she drew it along till they came to a large V-shaped rock that seemed to project from the bank. She pulled the canoe high and dry onto a shoal of pebbles, then lifted Bronya onto the rock. "We must wait here till daylight," she said. And they sat there, shivering and clinging to each other, till the shadows brightened, and they could see the whole sweep of the river, white and broken in the middle, rock-strewn at either side, the hills hemming it in, and not a soul in sight. They could not have felt lonelier. Then Bronya saw something which gave them hope. Down in the water, near the point of the V-shaped rock, was the very paddle they had lost. This was luck indeed. They turned the canoe over and poured the water out. Then, with new confidence, they launched it again. Stepping aboard, they headed for midstream. The current caught them and carried them on towards the rapids. The river grew faster and the bank flashed past. Soon they were in a gorge where the river squeezed past great boulders, some of them as high as houses. Spray dashed over the bow. The water roared, and there were huge, oily surges that looked as if they would pound you down into the depths. Bronya closed her eyes and clung to her sister. Ruth was not as scared as she had expected to be. With a sense of exhilaration, she flashed in with her paddle, heading always for the open stream, away from the white, broken water and looming boulders. Then they were safely past. The river broadened, and the banks were wooded again. The terrors of the rapids were over. There seemed no need for the paddle now, for the water was clear of rocks and the current smooth and swift. They could let the canoe take care of itself. Bronya fell asleep, and Ruth lay back and watched the blue sky overhead and the climbing sun. It was to be another scorching day, and she too became sleepy and dozed. A grating, tearing sound brought her to her senses, to find herself thigh-deep in water. The canoe had grounded, and a sharp stone had ripped the canvas underneath. She looked about her. The river was very broad here, and they were near the right bank where it was shallow. They stepped out and scraped the waterlogged craft over the pebbles and hauled it ashore. "The tear's too long to mend," said Ruth. "We shall have to walk. It can't be far to the Danube now." They found a path through the trees and followed it to the last big bend before the river joined the Danube at Falkenberg. There were no woods here, only green fields, a dusty road, and a gently sloping bank that reached far out into the river. Except for a couple of haystacks, the bank was deserted. A half-eaten apple struck Ruth on the shoulder. Then there was a bark, and Ludwig was licking her ankles. "Where have you been all this time? We thought you must have come to grief in the rapids," said Jan, who was standing lookout on top of one of the haystacks. "We went aground." He gave the sleeping Edek a shove, and the boy landed right at Bronya's feet. They walked into Falkenberg, crossed the Danube, then got a lorry lift along the road to Switzerland. After this, more walking. 3 days later, tired and joyful, they camped by the roadside. "Only 80 more miles to Lake Constance," said Ruth gaily. "Is Lake Constance in Switzerland?" said Bronya sleepily. Switzerland is on the far shore of the lake, said Ruth. Lie down here, Bronya. The grass is nice and thick. Jan's treasure box was one of the things they had salvaged from the wrecked canoes. He had been too busy to think about it, but tonight he decided to open it to make sure his treasures were safe. Suddenly he leapt to his feet. The sword's missing, he said. Someone's stolen it. Nobody would do that, said Ruth, thinking carefully back to the last time she had seen it. You showed it to Mr. and Mrs. Wolf, Jan, and put it on the mantelpiece. Did you leave it there? Jan stopped his raging, then grunted, Yes, and ran off to the road. I'm going back for the sword. The silly little idiot, Ruth exploded and ran after him. A few minutes later she brought him back. She ticked him off roundly, pointing out that the Wolfs were honest folk and would look after the sword until it was sent for. Sullen, resentful, plunged in gloom, he muttered, I'm going back all the same. Light a fire for us, Jan, said Ruth. Edek's not well and it will help him to sleep. It was a warm night and they did not need a fire, but she felt sure Jan would not leave them once he put his mind to something practical. Bronya lay curled in the grass with the blanket over her, already half asleep. Ruth gave her attention to Edek. Since the river adventure, he had been coughing more than ever and the pain in his chest was worse. She was shocked to see how haggard he looked. In her knapsack, she had a jersey that Mrs. Wolf had given her. She made him put it on and lie down in his blanket. He stopped coughing and lay still. At midnight, the fire had died down to a red glow. Ruth was still awake. Out of the darkness, a voice gasped her name. Edek, I thought you were asleep. I can't sleep. The pain's too bad, said Edek. I can't go on any further. You'll feel better in the morning, said Ruth. We'll get a lift. It's only 80 miles. She talked to him quietly for a while, and after a further bout of coughing, he dropped off to sleep. But anxiety for him kept her awake. A change had come over him during the last 24 hours. If they did not reach Switzerland soon, he might not live. The hours crept on, and still she did not sleep. Once more out of the stillness, a voice called her name. This time it was Jan. Ruth, may I have Edek's shoes when he dies? He's not going to die, said Ruth, forcing herself to speak calmly. He will if I don't have my sword, said Jan. And we'll never find your father either. He gave me the sword, it's our lifeline. We can't do without it. He spoke with such certainty that she almost believed him. But all she said was, Go to sleep, Jan. Everything will be all right. Jan did not go to sleep. It was Ruth who slept. There came a time towards dawn when she could not keep her eyes open any longer. The fire was cold and the sun peering over the hills when she woke. Jan and Ludwig had gone. Her first thought was to run after Jan. Then a glance at the two sleepers reminded her that she had other responsibilities more pressing. Gently she touched Edek's hand. It had hardly any warmth in it, and his face was frighteningly pale. Giving way to panic, she leaned over to listen for his breathing. Yes, he was breathing, thank God for that, but he did not look as if he would be able to get up, let alone walk. With a fierce effort of will, she took herself in hand and began to prepare breakfast. Bronya was the first awake, and she ate hungrily. She did not seem at all worried to find Jan gone. Jan can look after himself, she said cheerfully. He forgets that we may need him to look after us, said Ruth. The sun stealing over his drawn face woke Edek. He was too dazed to notice that Jan and Ludwig were missing. Ruth could not persuade him to eat anything, and she had almost to lift him to his feet. When she let go of him, he fell over. With Bronya's help, she got him up again, and with her arms round him, they staggered along the roadside. Then he collapsed. Ruth dragged him into the shade, and told Bronya to stay by the roadside and stop the first person that passed. A little later, a lorry came along, and at Bronya's signal, it braked to a halt. She called to the driver in Polish. He was an American GI. His face lit up when he heard her speak, and to her astonishment he answered in her own language. Have you come from Poland too? Said Bronya. Not exactly. My parents were Polish, but I'm from the States, said the man. We went there before the war. Joe Walski's my name. Just call me Joe. It's good to hear a Polish voice again. He stepped down from the lorry and took her hands in his. "Now, lady, what's your trouble?" They squashed into the front seat of the truck beside Joe Wolski, and off they rattled on the road to Switzerland. "You'll be telling me you've come all the way from Warsaw," said Joe. "So we have," said Bronya. "Gee, that's some way," said Joe. "How's the kid doing?" The kid, Edek, was sitting by the door where the fresh air from the open window had revived him. Ruth watched Joe take both hands off the steering wheel to light a cigarette, and suddenly jab in an elbow to correct a swerve. After her almost sleepless night, she was too tired to do anything but lie back with her head against the seat. In spite of their good luck in securing a lift, she could not shake off her anxiety for Edek. The countryside swept by, trees and hills and villages, and after a while, Ruth roused herself and asked Joe where he was taking them. "You leave that to me, lady," he said. "You've plenty on your mind, and you've told me where you want to go." "But we hardly know who you are, or what you're doing." "I'm the occupation," he said. "The army taught me French so I could go to Paris, then posted me to Germany because I can't speak German. I'm here to fire folks with the spirit of occupation, to tell them they've all grown up the wrong way, but what's the use? They're so sick and tired they just stare at you. It's not often you get a chance to help someone. Gee, that was a close shave." Joe had been trying to light another cigarette, and the lorry had swerved across the road and nearly knocked down a tree. He righted her just in time, blew the tree a kiss, and drove on. "What was that noise?" said Bronya. "I heard a yelp. You haven't run over—" No, said Joe. "Just the tires complaining, I expect. Now, talking about growing up wrong, that tree's a case in point. Only a muttonhead would have let it grow there." "Nonsense," said Ruth. "It's well off the road. Be sensible and let me hold the wheel while you light up." After a while, Bronya asked, "What's in the back of the truck, Joe?" "Never you mind," said Joe. "Could I sit in the back?" said Bronya. "You wouldn't like it," said Joe. "There's a couple of bears and a hyena in there." "Jan would love that," said Bronya. "Who's Jan? Is he your boyfriend?" Bronya giggled and told him he was a friend who had run away. "Oh," said Joe, and a smile stole across his face. "Why did he run away?" Bronya told him all about it, and when she had finished, Joe said, "I once knew a kid who ran away. I'd gone to sleep in the back of my truck, and when I woke up in the morning, there he was, stretched out beside me. Must have climbed in during the night. I shook him awake and asked what the heck he was doing. Said he was going north, and if I was going that way, would I take him? Now, I was going north as it happened, but when I heard his business, I changed my mind. I told him he ought to have known better than to desert his folks. He kicked and stormed at me as if he was crazy and called me all the names that aren't in the dictionary. Know what to do with a fellow like that? You truss him up and leave him to cool off in the back of the truck till he knows better. And that's just what I did." There was a question already on Bronya's lips when she heard a bark from behind her. "Oh, that must be the hyena," said Joe. "Like to take a look?" He stopped the truck, and Ruth and Bronya followed him round the back. He hoisted them up. There on the floor was Ludwig, barking and wagging his tail. Jan was beside him with a handkerchief over his mouth and his wrists and ankles bound. Joe untied him and said with a broad grin, "How are you feeling, kid?" Jan's answer was to kick and spit at Joe like a Catherine wheel. "It was true what I told you about a couple of bears and a hyena," said Joe. "Here they are, all rolled into one." Ruth begged Jan to stop kicking, but he took no notice. "Does this make you feel better?" said Joe, and he threw him a slab of chocolate. Jan threw it back. "Nothing for it but to tie up the parcel again," said Joe, and managed with some difficulty to tie him to the tailboard, but left his mouth free. And off they went. The lorry made a lot of noise on the bumpy road, but not half as much as Jan made. In this manner they journeyed the 60-odd miles to Lake Constance, right to the gate of a Red Cross camp, which was a collection of tents and Nissen huts between Uberlingen and Meersburg, within a stone's throw of the lake. The hills round about were thickly wooded, and trees crowded the shore. Across the water could be seen the green hills of Switzerland, and behind them, in a haze of sunshine, the majestic Alps. Ruth gasped. The mountains were more beautiful than anything she had ever imagined. The motion of the truck had rocked Edek to sleep, and he only stirred when Ruth and Bronya shouted and clapped for joy. "Please, can you let Jan out?" said Ruth. "He'll feel quite different if you show him the mountains of Switzerland." Joe untied him. Jan was quiet and sober, for he had kicked and shouted till he had no more kick or shout in him. He accepted some chocolate, and when Joe put an arm round his shoulders and pointed to the mountains they'd come so far to see, he burst into tears. The camp doctor wanted to separate the family, with Edek in the Nissen hut, which served for a hospital, and the rest in E Block at the other end of the camp, but Ruth refused to leave him. Finally, she was allowed one of the tents outside the hospital block, within call of Edek's bed, and here under canvas the three of them made their home. But the camp superintendent would not allow the family to cross over to Switzerland. The Swiss authorities could take no more refugees unless there were relatives in the country willing to be responsible for them. Besides this, they needed proof of identity before any arrangements could be started upon. Ruth thought the sword might help to prove who they were, and she wrote at once to the farmer for this. As for relatives in Switzerland, she did not even know if her father had arrived there, nor could she remember her grandparents' address in Basel. She had no idea if they were still alive. She was feeling sad and disheartened when she said goodbye to Joe. They had come so far, and now that their goal was within sight, it seemed harder than ever to reach. She thanked him from the bottom of her heart for all his kindness. "Don't call me kind," said Joe. "Everywhere's a mess. I want to help clean it up. I want to show folks that you can't see all of life from a hole in a Blitz cellar. There's more to it than ruins. Sometimes things work out right and sometimes they don't." As he shook Ruth's hand, he added, "This time, they're going to work out right." One by one, the hot, stifling days of August dragged by. There was thunder in the air, but the black clouds held back their rain. They seemed to be saving it up for some grand and terrible occasion. The family hoped that the ITS, International Tracing Service, would soon answer the superintendent's letter. He had lost no time in sending them all the information that Ruth had given him, but his inquiries in Basel for the grandparents had yielded no result. One day, late in the month, the superintendent called Ruth to his office. His face was as grave as usual. "That sword you told me about, Ruth. Could you describe it, please?" She did so in great detail, and a smile spread over his face. "Ruth, you're the luckiest girl in Europe," and he unrolled a small brown paper parcel on his desk. Out of it tumbled 2 crumpled letters, and the sword. One letter was from Herr Wolf, and the other from her father. Both were addressed to the headquarters of the ITS. Herr Wolf's letter contained as much of the story of the family as he had managed to piece together, as well as their plans for getting to Switzerland. The other letter, from Joseph Baliki, bore a January date. He described the children and their circumstances up to the time when he had last seen them. He referred to his escape from Zakina, his unsuccessful attempt to find his family, the meeting with Jan, and how he had given him the sword, and his long journey to Switzerland. Ruth was so overcome that all she could do was bury her face in her hands. She hardly heard what the superintendent was saying. "Your father is living in Appenzell, just the other side of the lake." He handed Ruth a telegram. Brushing away her tears, she read the message. "Will collect children on 23rd at Meersburg by the afternoon boat. All arrangements about permits in hand this end." "I wish all our cases could end as happily as yours," said the superintendent. But Ruth was already out of the room and running to her family to tell them the great tidings. 5 minutes later, the Red Cross nurse on duty heard a fearful row. Rushing in, she found 3 children and an elderly dog dancing up and down on Edek's bed. When she protested, they threw all his pillows at her. So she fetched a broom and chased 3 of them down to the lake. Then she returned, angry and out of breath, to pick up the pillows and see if the patient had died of shock. But the patient had sneaked out and joined the others on the shore. For him, the news was more of a tonic than all the medicine in the world. The Swiss boat that was to take them over the water was not due for hours, but the family were too impatient to wait. They were down by the lakeside, eager to catch a glimpse of her. They were so excited they did not notice how heavy the air was, and how dark the clouds. Ludwig was unhappy and kept whimpering, but not even Jan seemed to notice. "Let's go on past that headland," said Jan. "We'll get a much better view of the lake." "We'll have to cross this stream," said Ruth. "It's only a trickle," said Jan. And that was true. They could cross easily by jumping from boulder to boulder. "I'll stay on this side," said Edek, who was out of breath. "A good idea," said Ruth. "There's a boat on the shore behind you, and it's half-decked in front." "Well, what about it?" said Edek. "You can shelter inside if it rains," said Ruth. It was the first time that anyone had mentioned rain. Soon, as the three of them scampered along the shore towards the headland, the first drops began to fall. Ruth looked back and waved Edek towards the boat. With a laugh, he obeyed her. "Shall we really see Father's ship coming?" panted Bronya, as her short legs paddled along beside her sister. "Yes," said Ruth. But if she had looked up, she would have seen that the far side of the lake was hidden in the gathering rain. Suddenly, there was a great clap of thunder. It rolled and echoed far away into the mountains. Lightning streaked through the black clouds, flickered along the wooded hills. The thunder and lightning were the heralds of what came to be known as the freak storm of 1945. Those who were caught in it were to remember it with horror all their lives. Suddenly, in one huge downpour, the sky shed its burden of rain. It lashed the lake and beat upon their bare heads and soaked them to the skin. In great blinding sheets it fell, so they could not see where they were. Their ankles were deep in water. Had they stumbled into the lake, or was the shore flooding? Ruth felt for Bronya's hand and clung to it. She felt for Jan's too, but he was trying to grip Ludwig's collar and calm him. "We must go back to Edek," she said. This was easier said than done. Her head was numb with the force of the rain, her eyes half closed. She bumped into a fallen tree, then, feeling her way with her one free hand, groped along the shore with head bowed and feet floundering in mud and water and swirling pebbles. She was pulling Bronya and shouting to Jan to keep close. They came to a place they did not recognize. A river was hurling itself into the lake. "We'll never get across. Oh, Edek! Edek!" Ruth cried. And they stood watching helplessly as the current swept all kinds of things headlong into the lake. Tires, planks, part of a landing stage, whole trees. A dead sheep went by. A bough with a cat standing on it, its back arched in terror. Suddenly, Ruth realized the rain was easing and she could see across the river. A sudden pang of anxiety struck her. This raging river was the little trickle of a stream they had crossed so effortlessly an hour ago. Edek must be on the other side. But Edek was not there, nor was the boat she had told him to shelter in, and the water was all round them, up to their knees and rising higher. With an effort, she pulled Bronya clear onto some muddy ground. "Where's Jan gone?" panted Bronya. "I don't care where he's gone," said Ruth bitterly. "I told him to stay with us, but he went after Ludwig. Oh, Edek, Edek!" Brushing the wet hair from her eyes, she peered out into the lake. If he had stayed in the boat, he must have been washed out with it. In all the flotsam and jetsam tossed about in the mud-stained waves, she could see no sign of the boat. "Jan's on the cliff behind," said Bronya. Ruth turned. It was hardly a cliff, little more than a bump of ground clear of the water. "Can you see him from up there, Jan?" Ruth called. "He got away," Jan cried, looking inland. "I mean Edek, can you see his boat?" But Jan didn't answer. He was thinking of Ludwig. Ruth ran up to him. She wanted to shake him to pieces for being so selfish. But Bronya was calling. "I can see Edek's boat out in the middle of the lake. It's miles away." Again, Ruth swept the hair from her eyes. The boat was hardly more than a dark smear on the waves. The fear that she felt now was greater than any fear she had ever known before. And all the while the rain poured down, and the ever-widening river carried with it more trees, more animals, dead and alive, out into the lake. It brought with it a rowing boat, too. At once, Ruth waded out for it. It was close to the bank, bumping along sluggishly, half full of water. Nevertheless, when she caught hold, it almost carried her away. It would have done so if Jan had not waded in to help. "Go away and look for your dog," said Ruth bitterly. "You don't care about Edek. Go away. I hate you." But Jan clung on. Together they dragged the boat onto the mud. They managed to tip out some of the water. They found an oar jammed under the seats. In the locker at the stern was some rope and a bailer. Ruth knew what she wanted to do now, but she did not speak of it. Instead, she lashed Jan with her tongue. "You never cared about us. All you ever think about is your blessed animals. Look, there's Ludwig up there by the road. Run after him. Bronya and I can save Edek without you." The girls jumped into the boat. It needed no pushing, for the water was already round it. Jan was still gazing up at Ludwig. The dog was running round and round in circles, crazy with fear. It was a bitter moment for Jan. More than anything, he wanted to go after Ludwig, but Ruth's words had hurt him. They had stirred something deep down in his heart. With a great effort of will, he shed Ludwig from his mind and turned to his friends. In Ruth's face, he saw what he had hardly noticed before, though they'd long been there. Courage, self-sacrifice, and greatness of heart. He hesitated no longer. He had lost Ludwig, but he had not lost Ruth. He threw his treasure box into the boat, jumped in and seized the oar. Sliding the oar over the stern, he shoved the boat into the current. In that moment of decision, Jan began to grow up. And the boat was caught up in the swirl of the water and thrust far out into the lake towards the heart of the storm. It was dark when Ruth opened her eyes. She was being lifted up. A man's voice said, "It's a girl, thin as a string of seaweed and wringing wet. How you feeling, eh? We nearly ran you down in the dark." Ruth tried to speak, but no words came. Her mind drifted to a blank. When she woke again, she was lying in a bunk. There were dry blankets round her and a flicker of warmth in her limbs. "Where am I?" she said. Strange faces peered down at her. There was a cup at her lips. She sat up. "Edek! Bronya! Jan!" she cried. And from the back of the crowd came the echo, "Edek! Bronya! Jan!" in a deep voice. Dazed and bewildered though she was, she knew it for her father's voice. Now she was gathered in his arms, smothered with his kisses. She tried to speak, to listen to what he was saying, but her head was throbbing and she was too tired to keep her eyes open. When she woke again, her father's face was close to hers. "You've been asleep a long time," he said. "Try to stay awake and I'll show you what you want to see." And she felt herself lifted from the bunk. "Look down there," said Joseph. She saw in a nest of blankets Bronya's sleeping head. She was snoring. "Nothing much wrong with her," said Joseph, and he carried Ruth to the next bunk. She saw Edek's face. It was very white and he was lying still and as straight as a post. "Is he breathing?" she said. "Yes, he's breathing," said Joseph, "but only just." And he carried her quickly away and showed her Jan. He was dangling his legs over the edge of his bunk, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "They're a feeble lot, the Balikis," he said. "They would all have drowned if it hadn't been for me. Ruth, you're crazy. Fancy going for a sail in weather like this and thinking you could manage without me? You use an oar like a soup spoon, and when a little water comes in, you faint. I had to find Edek's boat and steer ours to it. He'd fainted too. The water was nearly up to his neck. So I pulled him into our boat 2 seconds before his sank." Joseph patted his cheek affectionately. "Eat up your bread and cheese and stop boasting. If you say any more, you'll pop." Ruth gave Jan a hug. "You ought to be made an admiral at once," she said. "Thank God they're safe, all 3 of them." And then she flung her arms round her father's neck. "You've got your numbers wrong. I haven't finished yet," he said, and he carried her out of the cabin. "There are only 3, said Ruth. "What do you mean?" "The last and the best surprise," said Joseph, opening another door. The cabin was small, and there was only 1 person in it. Her arms stretched out in welcome. "Mother," said Ruth, and with a happiness that no words can describe, she slipped from her father's arms into those other arms, so eager to receive her. Her mother had been in a concentration camp until, after months of searching, Joseph had traced her through the Red Cross. 4 years of suffering had turned her hair quite white, and there were deep lines in her face. But Ruth's heart was so full that she saw only the joy and the happiness there.
"Mother was beside you all the time you were asleep," said Joseph. "She went when you woke. We didn't want to give you too many shocks at once."
Jan came in, his mouth full of bread and cheese. "Ruth, I meant to tell you, I haven't got my treasure box anymore. I was so busy rescuing Edek, I forgot all about it. It's at the bottom of the lake now." "But the silver sword," cried Ruth. "Everything in the box is lost," said Jan ruefully. "Now the fishes have my treasures. As they're not secrets anymore, I'll tell you what they were. 2 cat's claws, a curtain ring, and the buttons off a German uniform, half a pen nib and an acorn, Russian shaving soap with some hairs from Ivan's chin stuck in it, Frau Wolf's till opener, a silver teaspoon from that house in Berlin where the English soldier lived. The brightest feather in Jimpy's tail, that was precious. And 3 dead fleas from the hairy chest of Bistro the chimpanzee. Bistro gave them to me, and I shall miss them dreadfully." For one who had suffered so shattering a loss, he did not look as grief-stricken as you might have expected. "But the sword," said Ruth. "Ah, the sword," said Jan. He looked at Joseph. "If I'd lost the sword, we should never have found you again." He bared his chest, and there, hanging from a string round his neck, was the silver sword. He untied the sword and handed it to Ruth's mother. "This was the most precious of all my treasures," he said. "Joseph gave it to me, but it's yours now. You can keep it forever if you'll be my mother." On a hillside, in the Swiss canton of Appenzell, an international children's village was being built, the first of its kind in the world. Swiss schoolchildren had collected £30,000 to help pay for the work. A great Swiss youth organization had provided more. Many of the workers gave their help free. By 1946, men from all over Europe were camping together and working happily side by side. A few months before, some of them had been in opposite armies fighting each other. Now they had joined together to build a village where orphaned children could forget the misery of war, where their minds and bodies could be healed, and they could learn to live in peace. Joseph Baliki had been one of the earliest and keenest helpers. Now he and his wife were chosen to be housefather and housemother of the Polish house. Each nation was to have its own house, where 16 orphaned children could grow up with the family of the house parents. They would be taught in their own language and join the children from other houses for games and activities. Joseph had his family to help build the house. It had central heating, shower baths, electric fittings in the kitchen, bright living rooms and gay bedrooms. The children had never known such comfort. By the late summer of 1946, they had settled in with 16 orphaned children from Poland. Yet it would be wrong to pretend that life for the Balikis was at once serene and free of trouble. They had been parted too long and suffered too much. On the whole, Bronya was the quickest to settle. She had been only 4 when her mother had been taken away. Too young to remember happier days, she had quickly accepted Ruth as her new mother. And through the terrible hardships of the war, Ruth had looked after her with wonderful devotion. Restored now to her parents, Bronya grew up as a happy and gifted child. Her talent for drawing matured. At first she could draw only the scenes of war she had lived through. Her pictures were full of soldiers, ruined buildings, open railway trucks, and queues outside the soup kitchens. Gradually her subjects changed. Soon they began to reflect her new and secure life among the mountains of Switzerland. Edek was not so fortunate. Many of the children admitted to the village showed signs of tuberculosis, but hardship and lack of good food had made Edek much more delicate than most. He had to be sent away to a sanatorium, and for the first month the doctors despaired of his life. But the will to live was strong in him, and he grew better. After 18 months he returned to his family. Another 6 months of open-air life in the mountains made him fit enough to go to Zurich and study engineering. And what of Jan? That charming bundle of good intentions and atrocious deeds? His parents were never traced, so he became a Baliki. During the war, his mind had suffered more than his body, and minds usually take longer to heal. He did not take easily to a peaceful life. He was excitable and could not concentrate for long. He liked to play at firing squads and torture, at crossing the frontier secretly, and at smuggling. He was always fighting. Though he had had all the food he needed, he was the biggest thief in the village. He broke into the other houses and raided the larders. It was usually the German house, for he still hated Germans. Margaret Baliki treated him as lovingly as she did her own children, but he was often rude to her. Ruth was the only person who could manage him, and he remained as devoted to her as ever. She knew that the way to his heart was through animals. She persuaded her father to let him keep rabbits and goats. She took him to neighbouring farms, and soon the farmers found that he could do anything with a sick animal. If a cow was ill or a horse lame, they found it would get better more quickly if they sent for Jan instead of the vet. So in time, even Jan grew up. There were no more raids on larders, and the German children no longer got a shower of rotten apples whenever they passed the Polish house. Lastly, Ruth. She had been so brave, wise and unselfish that you might have expected her to present no problem at all. But she had grown up too quickly and shouldered responsibilities far beyond her years. As she wanted to be a teacher, her father lost no time in arranging for her to go away to university. She refused to go. Her parents meant so much to her that she could not bring herself to leave them. She behaved like a young child, clinging to her mother and following her about everywhere. It seemed as if she were trying to recover the lost years of her childhood. But this phase did not last. Little by little, the magic of her new surroundings worked its spell upon her. In 1947, she went to Zurich University to study for a degree. 4 years later, as a qualified teacher, she married a young Frenchman who had come to work in the children's village. When a second French house was built, she and her husband were made the house parents. The last time I heard of Ruth, she had 16 French orphans under her care, as well as 2 small girls of her own. As far as I know, she is there still, bringing them up in the spirit of the children's village. And over the way, at the Polish house in a velvet-lined drawer of her jewel box, Margaret Baliki keeps her proudest possession, the silver sword. This audiobook was produced and published by Penguin Books Limited.